Good morning. Hope everybody's well today.
Good morning, sir.
I think we're all in our places, and so I'm going to call this June 17th meeting to order. And the first thing I'll ask you to do is stand with me and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to Richmond. Mr. Commissioner, welcome home. You're looking well. Mr. Director, nice to have you at the head table with us, sir. And we will move to our first item on the agenda, which is I-264, I-64 interchange Phase 3A project. And this is not Chris Hall.
No, sir. Good morning, sir.
Did we upgrade, sir?
No, sir. Mr. Hall unfortunately could not be here this morning, so good morning to you and members of the board. I did want to provide a brief overview of the Interstate 264, Interstate 64 Interchange Phase 3A project, and future request for you to authorize the commissioner to enter into an agreement with the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, HRTAC. As you can see here on the map, this interchange is located in the cities of Norfolk and Virginia Beach and estimated to be one of the busiest interchanges in Virginia and is a critical link in the interstate system serving the Hampton Roads region. This Phase 3A project provides additional capacity, reduces crash potential on eastbound I-64, improves weave conditions on eastbound I-64 upstream of this interchange, and the project also raises 3 structures to achieve required vertical clearances. Due to the cost and need to maintain traffic through this interchange during construction, the improvements to the 264-64 interchange consist of 8 sub-projects. The first 2 sub-projects or phases 1 and 2, as shown here, were completed in October 2019 and November 2022, respectively. An interchange modification report that was completed and approved by the Federal Highway Administration in 2020 prioritized the remaining 6 sub-projects. This sub-project that we are calling Phase 3A was identified as the next priority phase to improve safety, congestion, and operations concerns at this interchange. As shown on this slide here, you see the estimate and schedule for this project. The project is being fully funded by HRTAC and will be procured as a design-build project. The proposed improvements shown in red on the graphic included in the 264-64 Phase 3A project consists of widening of Interstate 64 eastbound between Northampton Boulevard interchange and the 264-64 interchange, roadway improvements on 64 eastbound between this interchange and the bridges over the eastern branch of the Elizabeth River, replacement of a single-lane 64 eastbound movement to I-264 eastbound flyover ramp with a 2-lane structure, and modifications to several bridges along this corridor. The Phase 3A project has been approved for funding in HRTAC's Plan of Finance, and HRTAC at a future meeting will be recommending their commission authorize the HRTAC chair to enter into a standard project agreement with VDOT for this work. In July, we will be asking you to authorize the commissioner to execute an agreement with HRTAC for the preliminary engineering and right-of-way phases for this 264-64 interchange Phase 3A project, and future agreements with HRTAC necessary for funding and administration of 264-64 interchange improvements and any associated activities. It was a very brief overview, but I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Halsey. For for those of y'all who don't live in this place and don't know this as well, 64 is an east-west road, but really right there, it's really north and south. And you have the road that comes out of downtown Norfolk that goes to Virginia Beach, which is 295, intersecting with 64, which brings all the traffic from here in the peninsula to Chesapeake in North Carolina, the Outer Banks, and Virginia Beach. And so it's a huge intersection. Mr. Stamp, Mr. Coleman know it well, but I drove through it for 25 years because my office was 2 exits down. And typically, particularly eastbound on 64, in the morning, you have probably a couple hundred cars backed up on the 64 interstate trying to get on to 264 every morning. So this will address all those things. It's a bunch of people all coming together in one place, and it's an old intersection. I think that's number one. Number two, and Mr. Halsey sort of just said it and kept going, but I think it bears repeating. This is all HR TAC money, right? This isn't any, there's no classic state transportation funds in here. It's just HR TAC funds, all coming out of all coming out of the Hampton Roads region off that sales tax. It's also building most of the Hampton Roads bridge tunnels and all the express lanes and all that work. So again, I was just with the former governor who celebrated his 70th birthday over the weekend, but he's the guy who led the charge, and Speaker Howell jumped on board with others and led the charge to ensure that we had the HR tax of the world. And without that, there'd be billions and billions and billions of dollars that we're looking at being spent on really critical infrastructure projects in Virginia that would not be happening. So it's just another time to smile about what they did back in 2012 and 13 and 10 years ago to make this all be able to happen. Mr. Stamp.
I was going to comment, make the same comment as you did. I think that the number that HR TAC is funding is probably close to $5 billion when you take in HRVT, the express lanes, and this project. So, I mean, it's a huge chunk of money being funded by Hampton Roads and Hampton Roads alone.
And we have the same, with MBTA, with the Northern Virginia one and the Central Virginia one, we've got similar situations there. So those are big inputs into what we get accomplished for road infrastructure. And so it's great to have that. Any questions? All right, thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
The next item on the agenda is item 2. It's the Economic Development Access Program. Mr. Russ Dudley.
Morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board.
Morning, welcome. Hope you're well.
I'm doing very well. Today I'm going to provide a summary of 2 economic development access allocation requests. The first is a major employment and investment design-only project in New Kent County at the New Kent City Center. And the second is a non-MEI design-only project in Bedford County at the New London Business and Technology Center. And I'll go through each one of these separately. All right, we've seen a few of these recently, so I won't go into detail on the program, but this is a quick overview of the program. The Economic Development Access Allocation Program is designed to provide support for the design and construction of roads that serve new or expanding economic development sites. Localities submit applications on a rolling basis to VDOT, and our staff works closely with the Virginia Economic Development Program and VDOT district staff to determine the site's eligibility for the program. Today, as I mentioned, we also have a major employment and investment site application, and those receive allocations beyond the typical request once the site is confirmed as an MEI site by VEDP. Localities can also receive allocations for known industries or speculative sites with the appropriate surety to guarantee the allocations provided. Allocations can also be provided for the entire project or just the design. Since I mentioned major employment and investment, just want to give you a quick overview of what this is in case you need a reminder. I know you guys have seen this before. That MEI site is a site that can attract high economic development projects, which are expected to generate capital investments of at least $250 million and create more than 400 new full-time jobs. The New Kent allocation request is for the road design only, and the EDA program will provide design-only allocations for designated MEI sites for up to $650,000, with $150,000 of that being matched dollar for dollar. The allocations must be guaranteed by a surety, since there is no known site, no capital investment yet, which will be released after the final plans are approved. Final plans can take up to 2 years to complete. So localities can take 2 years to complete their final designs. This is just a location map of the New Kent City Center. You see it's located along the Interstate 64 at the Talleysville exit, 12 miles from Richmond and 42 miles from the Hampton Newport News. So this facility will have excellent access to the interstate. The allocation for this project will provide, again, designed for an access road extension of City Center Court Road to 600 acres of undeveloped property. The project will conduct an alternatives analysis to determine the roadway's extension preferred alignment to maximize the property's potential for development. The roadway's design process will include performing environmental tasks, reduce wetlands impacts, and design of a 1 to 2 mile long road, 35 feet wide approximately, which will include a new structure over an existing creek. VEDP has confirmed that the undeveloped 600 acres is capable of supporting at least $250 million in capital investment and creating 400 full-time jobs. The county is requesting $650,000, as I mentioned, for the design allocation. This illustration is just the 3 alternatives that are being looked at right now. Again, VEDP anticipates this as an MEI site and believes this site can support more than 2 million square feet of industrial space. Our second request for funding is a non-MEI design-only project in Bedford County. In 2021, our CTB EDA policy was updated to allow allocations up to $200,000 for the design only of access roads to new or potential sites. The policy was a recommendation of a 2020 JLARC report and a series of meetings with localities, stakeholders, and VEDP. Again, just a site location map of the New London Business Technology Center in Bedford County. It's a 500-acre business park located along Route 460, about 36 miles from Interstate 81 and 10 miles from the city of Lynchburg. The allocation for this project will provide funding for designing entrance improvements to accommodate increased business park traffic and an extension of Meade Road, and I have an illustration here for you in a second, to provide access to 168 acres of undeveloped property known as Phase 2 of the New London Business Technology Center. VEDP has designated the site as a Tier 3 site in their Business Ready Sites program. The Business Sites Ready program has 5 tiers, with Tier 1 being raw land and Tier 5 being a pad ready with infrastructure. To be classified as Tier 3, it requires all master planning to be complete and zoning to be complete. Bedford County is requesting an allocation of $200,000, with $50,000 of that being matched dollar for dollar. Illustration of the plan project. As I mentioned, it will provide access to Phase 2 of the industrial park. Our next steps are to bring you resolutions for the allocations next month and request your approval. Any questions on these 2 projects?
Comments or questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Douglas.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary, these
Dr.
sorts
Smoot.
of projects, as I recall, tell me if I recall correctly, do require a payback if the project does not occur within a certain amount of time?
Mr. Secretary, Dr. Smoot. These are, yes, the program, when it's a speculative site, when there's no known industry, does require a bond or surety of some sort. These are design-only projects, so.
Paid after incurred.
Yeah, so they will, so they have to get our approval within 2 years of the design. If they do not, they will have to pay that back. So they have to issue a surety for this funding.
Anybody else? All right, thank you. We're on to item number 3, a 2024 General Assembly update. Ms. Jones and Ms. Maxwell, and maybe Mr. Wright.
Mr. Secretary, board members, before Joanne gets started, I just wanted to start by saying a huge thank you. A lot of people don't understand how much work goes into a General Assembly session. The staff here at VDOT, the staff at DRPT, as well as others within our Secretariat, Aviation, Space, the Port, VPRA, DMV, Motor Vehicle Dealer Board, all come together as a big team. There's a lot of cross-functionality that happens. This year, we had almost half new folks in the General Assembly. Our committees of jurisdiction had a lot of new folks. And so Joanne's going to go through some of the legislation that has importance to the board here, but I just wanted to highlight that there's even some broader pieces that we're not going to talk about today that will have some impacts in the broader transportation space. Sometimes those are shared with folks like public safety and the towing space. There's other things in the procurement space that have also happened, as well as things like related to CDLs or related to abandoned aircraft. So there's a lot more than what you're going to even hear about today. And if you have questions on any of those things, please come to us. But more than anything, I just wanted to highlight the cross-functional work that I got to see firsthand with all of the staffs and the way that every single morning really early would come in, help educate new members of the General Assembly, issue spot on bills that maybe we hadn't brought forward, try to find ways to make ideas better that maybe hadn't been fully vetted. And I think as a result, you'll hear about a number of them now, but our success rate as a secretariat in getting through, I think, the best possible outcomes from the General Assembly in a very bipartisan manner is very reflective of the incredible staff work. And you should all take a moment to thank folks like Joanne, because the Commonwealth is really, really lucky to have folks like her and her team. Joanne?
Thank you, Deputy Jones. And Deputy Jones had the lead in our office on the legislature this year, and it was active, I would say. And so I appreciate all the work that you've done and the rest of the team to keep us on point here. Senate's coming back tomorrow. Found that out over the weekend. House, not tomorrow. So the process continues, ladies. All right, Joanne. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, to that point, we're already seeing bills, so we will keep you posted.
We'll see. We'll see.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm here to, as Rachel noted, just to highlight some of the bills from VDOT's perspective that are potentially important to the board or of import to the board. I'm not going to go through all of the bills. You have a chart in your materials. I'm not going to go through all of the bills, but just wanted to highlight a couple very quick, couple of bills very quickly. Some are what we call legislative or bills that are put in the code, and then others are items in the Appropriation Act. So the first bill I wanted to highlight was HB 74, and that bill simply clarified the types of work that could be used or funded by the unpaved secondary highway funds. Several years ago, these funds could only be dedicated to paving unpaved highways. The law was changed so that it contemplated improvements, not just paving. So this year, they came back and modified the law to give examples, in essence, of the type of work. And it's things like improved drainage, improved materials, upgrades to grading, those types of things. So it just clarified the type of work that can be done. The bill notes that if the localities and VDOT, if there are standards federal and state standards, they shall be heeded. If there are no such standards for the type of work, then we will work with the localities to develop agreeable standards.
Mr. Kasperitz.
Yes, I just want to comment on this bill in particular. It's surprisingly very important up in Northern Virginia, where Loudoun County has 260 miles of unpaved roads. So it has freed up funding that would have been required to go to paving to do necessary road improvements, and I think it's a big win. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, just as a note, or members of the board allocates up to $25 million a year in these funds. The next item is, the next couple of items, HB 92 is just a naming bill for its commemorative naming. I don't want to lessen the import of that, but it's a bill. It's
Straightforward.
It's very straightforward. The next two bills deal with what I'll call their notification types of bills. One requires VDOT to develop a database that notifies entities, the public actually, of utility work that's going to be going on in their area, and just to give them notice that there might be disruption on the highways, et cetera. The next bill involves changes in speed limits, requires VDOT to notify local governments when changes in their speed limits will occur, or the speed limits in those localities will occur. The next bill is important from a safety perspective. HB 282 would increase the violation, the penalties for violations that occur in a work zone, and they're fairly significant increases. Basically, if a traffic infraction occurs in a highway work zone, it can be any traffic infraction, not just speeding, but any traffic infraction, the fine to be charged shall not be less, for the first offense, less than $300, for a second offense, not less than $500, and then for an offense that occurs within a year of a prior offense, up to $750. So they are significant increases in the penalties. The next bill that would be of some import or interest to this board, there was legislation that allows now a locality to reduce the speed limits in residential and business districts from 25 miles per hour to 15 miles an hour, and as long as they post signage indicating as such. The bill would also allow the localities to revert those speed limits back up to 25 if they saw fit. The real change in this legislation this year is that it will allow localities to take this action on roads that are maintained by VDOT. So that's the most significant aspect of this bill.
Secretary.
Mr. Kasperitz.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on this bill as well. I think it's an important piece of legislation that gives, I think, necessary control to local authorities. You know, the towns and cities have a pretty good handle on where they think they can improve pedestrian bike safety and reduce traffic accidents through lower speed limits. Prior to this, that authority rested with VDOT exclusively, and it's sometimes hard to transmit the need or the current situation in that situation. So this is a opportunity for local elected officials to pass a resolution, create an ordinance to make those changes on their own. And I really endorse the work done on this. Thank you.
And one other note on that bill, the locality would be required to provide VDOT with notice at least 30 days prior to the change. The next bill is important. This is a bill that has been in the works for the last several General Assemblies, and this year the bill met with success. Basically, Kim Pryor and Greg Henyon are going to be giving you a presentation later, so I won't go into great deal, but bottom line, this bill, in essence, expands the eligibility or the group of bridges that are eligible for state of good repair funds, as well as the type of work that can be done on those bridges. So more to come on that. It will require policy change by this board of their SGR program. So. To move. There we go. The next bill involves an expansion of the use or potential use of photo speed monitoring devices on certain intersections in the Commonwealth. Right now, photo speed monitoring is allowed in work zones and in school zones. This bill increases the locations where they can be used to basically, what they're called high-risk intersections. And those intersections are basically marked with a crosswalk. They have to be within about 1,000 feet of a school, and they have to have incurred, or there has had to have been a traffic fatality at that location within the last 14 years, or since 2014. The other key aspect to this bill is that any fines or penalties that are generate from these infractions or these occurrences will go to the Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. The next couple of bills are bills that were not successful in the General Assembly, but they are likely going to result from studies. We've been issued letters to study the bills, or we or another entity. First one deals with highway transportation projects, dealing with highway safety projects and the safety of projects in school zones. The next bill deals with license plate readers, which you all may have heard quite a bit about in the law. Just a quick point about license plate readers. VDOT was involved in that legislation to some extent, but it was not about the merits of the legislation or those devices, but it was more about the concern of placement of those devices in the right-of-way, ensuring safety, making sure they had land use permits, et cetera. So that bill has been referred to the State Crime Commission. They'll be looking at the merits of the bill further.
Ms. Sellers?
Are they discussing connecting HB 775, SB 330, the license plate reader, the penalties for speeding in school zones, and the one on they haven't discussed kind of
No.
combining all of these things into one
No, they have not, and I think, Mr.
They're
Chair.
separate. Yeah, they're really separate and distinct things.
They really
You know,
are,
this
yeah.
safety thing, the speed cameras are all specific to a certain thing that's occurring, and it's in a certain place, right? So you've got a safety zone, or you have a school zone, and in the bill that you saw, you've had some activity in that school zone, meaning some travel activity, some problem activity, then you can expand the enforcement area and have a higher fine. The license plate readers aren't specific to anything. They just read every license plate that goes by, right? And it's just tracking people. That's all they do. They don't do speed. They don't do hard braking. They just read license plates.
So if
And
you
so it's basically a database of where people are, where license plates are, as they move through the Commonwealth. And they're not allowed currently. They're not allowed in VDOT right-of-way because we don't have the authority to allow them in the right-of-way. So so some people have tried to put them in the right-of-way and have put them in the right-of-way inappropriately, but they're not allowed. We don't have the authority under the Attorney General's view to allow them to be put on our poles to begin with. So they're not allowed on our poles, so they can't be on our poles, and they can't be on our poles until VDOT has authority to put them on there. So that's sort of the difference between the two kinds of.
There's a foundation building here for some really powerful technology, and when it all comes together to where you can actually begin to use technology more efficiently and to use it in very interesting ways. And when you see these three bills here together, just to really, really put the infrastructure of what transportation has and the right-of-ways of transportation, the power of technology, because if you have the license plate reader and that technology, if we have that capability, then you have a lot of other capabilities probably embedded into that technology. Just knowing what's typically involved in a license plate reader and the databases behind it. And then if you have the policy that allows you to do that, and then the technology and the backbone behind that to then tell law enforcement and to have that ability do these civil penalties. You can do some really powerful things if there's a will. We just have the foundation here, then it's all kind of coming together if there's an interest. So just kind of putting that out there that you do have it all here. So it's just very interesting that these are all in one General Assembly here.
I
It's
think
all
that's
there.
obviously part of the concern.
Yeah.
Mr. Stanton, Ms. Stanton and Mr. Merrill.
This license plate reader was the subject of a decision made by a Norfolk judge last week.
Last week.
That threw a case out on the basis that she didn't see much difference between this and the police attaching a GPS to your car. And what you need to understand, well, I understand it. I'm not sure I agree with that.
We're not going to debate that.
Yeah,
here.
I understand. But the problem I see is that this license plate reader is not run by a city. It's run by a private company that has the ability to use that to track where people are going and what stores they're going to and everything else. I mean, it's a can of worms. I don't know. It's like everything else. It's a two-edged sword. It's good in some ways, but bad in other ways. So everybody just should be aware that this is not run by a city. It's being run by a private entity.
It is. Mr. Merrill.
Just on the last bill, you talked about the photo speed monitoring. It is still just restricted to areas near school zones, correct?
Yes,
They
Mr.
can't-
Chair, that is correct. It has to be, this intersection, the high-risk intersection, has to be within 1,000 feet of a school.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, please continue.
Mr. Chair, the next bill deals with a study for Planning District 8 that involves various traffic calming devices. Again, that was a bill that failed, and VDOT will be asked to study the issues in the bill. The due date for the study is September of 2025. The next bill is a bill that failed. We have not yet gotten a letter. There have been some overtures that we might be expected to look at the bill, but the bill was important in that it would have added or given, in the smart scale process, bonus points to those improvements or those projects that were on primary evacuation routes. You'll see in the description of this bill, I've got maintenance of in brackets. When the bill was first introduced, it would have authorized these funds, smart scale funds, to be used for maintenance of these roadways, but that was not the patron's intent, so that was stricken. But bottom line, there's still the patron had interest in giving some sort of bonus points to these projects on the primary evacuation routes. We don't know at this point whether there will be an expectation or how strong the expectation is that we look at that. There are a couple of FOIA bills that I thought I should bring to the attention of the board. The first one deals with an exemption. Bottom line, a body such as the CTB has to follow certain rules when they are going to conduct a meeting, such as notice and certain types of publishings. The code addresses in FOIA what a public meeting is, and it basically is 3 or more individuals gathered together of the public body. There are some exceptions to that, and in essence, there's an informal exception that says when just 2 or more members of the body are gathering for just not really for purposes of the board's business or to transact or discuss board business, then that's exempt and it's not included or considered a meeting. They have modified that definition now to say, as long as none of the board's business is transaction or even discussed, will that exemption hold. So I think it's important for members to be mindful of that. Bottom line, if something were to happen, that several members got together casually, informally, and started just discussing board business, arguably that could be a FOIA violation because the meeting, it would constitute potentially a meeting and it should have been noticed and publicized.
Mr. Secretary?
So folks, for just a second, Ms. Hines. So for clarity's sake, right, when we get together and we're not in a publicly called meeting, whether it's at dinner tonight or some other place, we don't talk about business. We talk about general stuff and people stuff and all sorts of other things, but we don't get into the details of our business. And if we do, then we're violating the FOIA, and we shouldn't do that. Ms. Hines.
I'm looking for a little clarification on that, Mr. Secretary. So, Ms. Maxwell, I would imagine many of us are briefed by VDOT staff in our districts prior to coming down to the meeting. And that sometimes people double up because it's convenient and we're serving the same district. Is that, if it's two people, my understanding from all my years in public service was if two of us were together and we're getting briefed by staff, that was not a meeting. But this the way you presented it seems to imply something different, and I think we probably all need clarity on that.
Yeah, I think we need to look at that a little, Mr. Chair, a little more closely, given the change in the law, and we need to look at the 2 versus the 3, so we'll do that.
My reading has been that it's the same, Ms. Hines.
Sorry.
The 2 or more, you can have 2 people being briefed. And when you get to 3, you just can't talk about business.
Right. But I think that Ms. Maxwell said something different than that,
Well,
Mr.
we'll
Secretary.
confirm.
So
We'll go back and look at the law,
I
Mr.
think
Chair.
people just need to know for sure.
Understand. All right, we'll take a closer look at that. All right, the next item deals with, this board, probably about a year ago, passed a policy or adopted a policy whereby you would allow all electronic meetings for committees of the board. And at that point in time, the board just had to adopt a policy, and that was sufficient. Well, now the law has been changed, and it requires that a public body adopt such a policy annually. So what that means is, to the extent the board still wants to perpetuate that policy, they'll need to adopt it again. The other thing that this bill did was basically increase the number of meetings you could have annually from 25% of the meetings of that body to 50%. So just another change under FOIA to be aware of. The next items are, I want to talk about very quickly, are some budget items, and I may need to phone a friend in the form of Laura Farmer if you all have questions. The first,
She's waiting patiently.
I know she just can't wait. The first is a budget item that would, in essence, expand on the use of Garvey bonds and the funds from Garvey bonds. Right now, the bonds can be used for high-priority program projects and district grant projects, construction district grant program projects. It expands the group of projects to also include the interstate operations and enhancement program projects. So it expands on the group of projects that Garvey bonds can be used for. The next item is the TPOF item. If you all recall, a year or two ago, the law was changed to allow the governor to direct certain funds under TPOF, direct funding to a particular project, and in those cases, the board was notified and the board would allocate the funding. Under what's in the law right now, the board, there's basically a threshold. If that threshold for the project or the value of a project is not exceeded, then the project does not have to be reviewed by the MEI Project Advisory Commission. That currently in the law, that threshold is $35 million. The budget, there's a budget item now that decreases that threshold to $20 million. So effective July 1, if the governor directs $20 million to a project, the MEI Project Approval Commission will also have to review that project. The other thing that does, the bill does, is it gives MEI a little more, the MEI Project Advisory Commission, a little more time to review the projects. There are a couple of items in the bill, in the Appropriations Act, that increases funding for I-81. They come from the general fund. The first one is this item, 438 that you see here, that allocates or appropriates $70 million in general funds for the I-81 program. There's another item that also would provide $175 million to I-81, and that's at the end of your chart here. The other thing this budget item does is it allows projects I-81 projects to move forward for purposes of preliminary engineering and right-of-way phases. Right now, under the law, in order for a project to advance, all phases of the project have to be funded within the current 6-year program. This makes an exception and will allow for I-81 projects, the right-of-way and PE phases to advance. At the end of the day, the construction needs to be, in essence, programmed within the next 3 years. So that's a slight change, both the funding and the process.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Mr. Lawson.
I know this doesn't take effect until July 1, but can you give us ideas of what we're doing to get that underway?
Mr. Chair, I may have to defer to someone else. I'm not sure I can answer
Or I
that
can
question.
ask
We're-
later if
So,
you
Mr.
want.
Okay.
Lawson.
Yeah.
Mr. Lawson. As you know, there's an 81 committee that sort of is a steering committee, I guess, if you will. At the end of the day, they have a list of 65 projects that they blessed back in the beginning. And we've done a bunch of them, as you know. And you also know that the 81 money does not, the regular funding stream does not ever end unless it's ended by the General Assembly and the governor. And so we have unlike the regular work that we do on a 6-year plan, we have a 10-year plan for 81. And we know what we're going to do, and things have moved around a little bit, as you know, but we basically know what we're going to do. We know what the funding's coming from. They're already sort of set up to go. And because of our regular rules and policies, we weren't able to get going on some of them, even though we knew we were going to do them. We knew where the money's coming from. The committee agreed. Everybody was in line. And so this was intended to do that. So we will implement that forthwith, and the committee will continue to update their 10-year plan, if you will, as it moves forward. And we'll just move the money in and get going, if that makes any sense to you. So we had 4 projects outside of the 65, I think, Commissioner, that were the top 4 projects. There were 4 additional ones, yeah. So we sort of know where we're going, and all we're just trying to do is get there faster. So we got a little bit of extra money, which is great, and we've got the handcuffs off and able, in terms of being able to start, as long as we're within that 3-year window that you referenced. So it's a great thing, just gives us more flexibility, no risk really associated with it, and that's why we were supportive of it. That makes sense.
Mr. Chair, I'm advised too that Kim Pryor will have more detail about that in her presentation.
Great. Thank you.
The next item is toll relief. This involves ERC or the Midtown, downtown tunnel bridges down in between Norfolk and Portsmouth. This bill would provide $77 million in the first year and $24 million in the second year to, in essence, supplement a toll program that's already been put in place by ERC and funded, in essence, by ERC. These funds will be coming from the general fund, and basically what they will do is for those individuals that make, what is the threshold?
50.
Less than 50,000, they will be eligible for additional toll relief such that they will have 100% free passage for 14 trips a week over these facilities. Currently, the threshold income is $65,000 a year, and those individuals that currently are obtaining toll relief under the ERC program, they're allowed to get 50% reduction on 14 trips over those facilities a week. So this is going to supplant that program. It does not go into effect until January 1, 2025. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to work that out, work the program out.
Well, to be clear, it adds on to the existing program. It does not supplant.
I'm sorry, did I say supplant?
Yes,
I'm sorry,
ma'am.
it's supplement.
It adds on so that, and there's some technical issues we're working through here that we were unable to get corrected in the budget cycle. And so I'm working with the senator and others to sort of get this where it needs to be. But at the end of the day, the concept was to have, as Joanne said, currently we have people at 65,000 and below. And we're moving to a system to be an additional 50% for those that are 50,000 and below, up to 14 weeks. And 14 trips a week. And initially, it was intended to apply to the residents of Norfolk and Portsmouth, because those are the ones that really were most impacted and didn't have real alternatives. So anyway, that's what it does. There's some fish hooks in it we need to clean up. The commissioner's working with ERC and others to implement that, and we'll be ready to go before January. We've just got a little bit of work to do.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Chair. The next item is also a toll relief bill of sorts. It's a bill that, or a budget item that requires VDOT to study, or the commissioner to study the cost and feasibility of permitting HOV access at all times and free of charge on the downtown and midtown tunnels. Bottom line, it would ask us to study an HOV exception for toll payments. And that is pretty much it for my portion. We've already talked about the other funding source for I-81, and then the other item is just a study to look at a potential connector highway. So if there are no questions, I've just covered the VDOT portion of the General Assembly. Andy Wright from DRPT will be talking to you all about DRPT-related legislation.
Any questions for Joanne?
Secretary,
Yes, sir.
do we
Mr.
have
Merrill?
do we have any idea where this additional 81 money, or how this additional 81 money will be allocated?
What do you,
175, let's talk about this for the construction.
it'll go to whatever the plan is that comes out of the 81 committee that's endorsed by us.
Just to accelerate what's already in there.
Yes, sir. And there may, Mr. Merrill, as you know, we've had a couple of changes that have been made over the last couple of years in that plan that were a combination of work that the committee did and that we did at VDOT and the Secretary's office. And we moved some things to take advantage of some concurrent work that we were doing, and we saved a bunch of money. We moved something else because we didn't want, when we did that, we didn't want to tie up 21 miles of interstate for a number of years in the same place being constructed, et cetera. I'm not sure exactly on the number there, but so there'll be some stuff that might move around, and there'll be stuff that'll be added to the plan because our horizon keeps changing by a year every year. But it'll just dump into the funnel of the plan, Mr. Merrill, and accelerate those things and keep them going, along with the ability that we have to move some of those projects along when they're not fully funded in the plan yet. So all those things will coming together will help advance and accelerate the 81 work. That's the intent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Which is great. Mr. Wright, thank you. Welcome. Hope you're
Morning,
well
Mr.
today.
Secretary, members of the board. My slides are not up yet, but there we go. I'll try to run through these very quickly. I know you all have a busy agenda. House Bill 201, that's dealing with appointments by the Speaker of the House to NVTC, PRTC, and NVTA. Currently, they can be any citizen member appointment to those commissions. This bill now requires that they be members of the House of Delegates. House Bill 285 deals with bus shelters. Currently, any bus shelter built on state-owned property has to go through a review process by the Department of General Services. We have found that process is taking years just for a bus shelter. So this bill now moves that process over to the local building official that will expedite the process very much. House Bill 1425 is a bill introduced by Delegate Austin on behalf of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. It states that VPRA-owned railways and tunnels, railway tunnels and bridges will be treated the same as VDOT bridges and tunnels. They will no longer have to conform to the Uniform Statewide Building Code Act. Instead, VPRA will work with the state fire marshal on setting best practices for the bridges and tunnels. One Senate resolution of interest, Senate Joint Resolution 28. This is requiring the General Assembly to look at long-term needs for Northern Virginia public transit, including WMATA and VRE. They will come back with a report in January 2025, and then a final report in January 2026 with recommendations for funding moving forward. My last slide, 2 budget amendments of interest, one dealing with the Potomac-Rappahannock Transportation Commission that will allow them to enter into agreements with surrounding localities for more long-distance bus service from region to region. And the last one, which is the big one, additional funding for WMATA, $60.2 million in general funds in FY25, $84.5 million in general funds in FY26. Deanna will talk about that in more detail in her SIP presentation. It also is directing WMATA to do a study looking at long-term costs, especially administrative costs and non-vehicle maintenance costs. And then the last point is it suspends language in FY25 and 26 that caps the growth in Virginia's operating assistance. Currently, it can grow no more than 3%. That cap is suspended for FY25 and 26. And that is the quick rundown. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Wright? Folks, the WMATA situation is not resolved. The General Assembly has appropriated some money to sort of get them through, if you will. I will tell you that it's our view in the Secretary's office that there needs to be, continue to be substantive change in that organization in terms of what they provide and how they provide it. And it too often appears that some who are supporters just want more money, and more money is not going to solve their problem. It'll cover it up, but it doesn't get to the root of it. And so I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get more sort of teeth into that. We remain confident in their leadership and the capability of the CEO. But at the end of the day, they've had declining ridership for 10 years and escalating costs and all sorts of other issues, as you know. I think they're getting a handle and they're heading in the right direction, but there continues to be a lot of discussion about new sources of revenue and additional funding, and it just is a difficult. So we'll continue to work with them. We'll do what the General Assembly has directed us to do, but we'll continue to work with WMATA and try to make sure that that the Virginia dollars that are going in there are well spent, and that it's getting it's providing this sort of benefit that it really needs to provide. And WMATA is incredibly important to that region, you know, and it needs to be successful, and it needs to continue to flourish. But there's lots of work to be done. Thank you. Mr. Wright, any questions for Mr. Wright? All right, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the periodic regulatory review and reduction program. Ms. Maxwell's back. Thank you, ma'am.
Chair, now that we're done talking laws, let's talk regulations.
Regulation.
As you all are probably well aware and remember, that I come back to you every year to take a look at some regulatory reviews that we have to do pursuant to law. Basically, the APA requires periodic regulatory reviews, and I'm not going to belabor a lot of these slides because you've seen them time and time again. But bottom line, there's a requirement in the law that we do these periodic reviews. More recently, the governor issued an executive order in 2022 that impacts the type of, the nature of the reviews. The governor also established an office known as the Office of Regulatory Management that also has dictated or established guidelines and requirements that we must use in order to conduct these reviews. And finally, Chapter 444 of the 2018 Acts of Assembly requires DPB to report on those entities that are not complying with the law and engaging in these reviews. A little more about ORM. Basically, one other key aspect that has been very critical in the governors and ORMs on their agendas has been reduction of regulatory requirements by 25%. And those reductions can be made a variety of ways, but bottom line, if you're going to reduce or decrease the regulatory requirements in a set of regulations, you have to undergo a regulatory process that includes a NORA phase, a proposed phase, and a final phase. So, at present, we are looking for purposes of this periodic review, 4 regulations of this board. They're set out on the slide. One is the general rules and regs of the board. The other is rules and regs regarding waysides, rest areas, rules and regs governing hazardous material transport through bridges and tunnels, and finally, rules and regs for the administration, parking lots, and environments. Staff has already looked at these regulations very briefly and are seeing the potential need for some updates. Basically, periodic reviews, if you will recall, can be initiated 2 ways. You either announce to the world by means of a public notice that you're getting ready to engage in a periodic review. The item goes to public, or is posted, and the public has 30 days to comment. The other option is a more expedited option in essence, allows an entity, if they know that they do need to amend the regulations, they can forego the first process and they can jump straight to a notice of intended regulatory action. That is what we are proposing for these 4 regulations today. We know that there are amendments that can be made. We know there are likely some reductions that we can make. So basically, staff is, we're looking at potentially amendments that we're going to recommend that are substantive in nature, that would address regulatory reductions, and then we're even potentially looking at the combination of 2 of the regulations. Those would be the regulations dealing with the rest areas and then the parking lots and environs. So basically, if next month the CTB authorizes VDOT to file NORAs for these 4 regulations, we will do so. And then after that, they will undergo a 30-day comment period, and then we'll come back to this body with proposed regulations. And if we have decided it's appropriate to combine 2, you will come back you'll see a regulation where the 2 are combined. And then finally, we would anticipate that we ultimately could get to the final stages of the regs in mid or late 2025. So there you have it in a nutshell.
So Joanne,
Yes, sir.
if I wanted to change one sentence in this reg, how long would it take?
Mr. Chair, when you take into consideration just
Just ballpark.
probably a year. Used to be longer. It used to be, I mean, you could almost count on 18 months.
I just wanted to get that on the table.
Yeah, right.
If I want to change a
It takes a
period, a
while.
comma, a sentence, a word, that's about how long it takes.
Secretary?
Now, listen, there's some regulations that, bear a lot of public comment, a lot of things to get fixed and done, but there are a lot that aren't, and that's the process. Ms. Hines.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. I wanted to offer to some of our newer colleagues that some of the ways that I really came to understand how the board works was in this process, because often we have board resolutions and board policy that are echoed in the regs. And so sometimes staff comes back and says, we don't need this reg anymore, we've got it in board policy. And then when I asked to look at the board policy, what we found out was there were things in the board policy that actually needed to be fixed. So this process of going through these is actually a way to sort of understand the underpinnings of the work that we do all the time. So I just offer that. It's been very helpful to me, and Joanne is fabulous to work with and always would connect me when I had questions. So if that's a place where you like to understand, I commend this process. As spend a little bit of time, you'll understand more about how this all fits together.
Ms. Maxwell, I'll let you continue. Go ahead.
That is pretty much it, Mr. Chair. I am done.
How are we doing on our 25%?
Mr. Chair, we are getting there, and we anticipate that we will be able to achieve 25%. We may, because of the complexity of some of the things we're doing, we might be a little behind timeline-wise. I think at the end of this year, we're supposed to achieve, their goal is to achieve a 20% reduction. We may, I hate to overpromise, but we may be able to make it if, at least with regard to our guidance documents. But
Yeah, I'll tell you, VDOT, and listen, they're not alone, but when you get into construction and engineering and design and safety and there's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of things that are considered regulation. And you can't just like get rid of that, right? And so it's challenging. A lot of this we get from other people and we sort of bring it into our world and as much of it's technical, so it's hard. So I appreciate what you're doing. We've done this regularly since I've been on this board, irrespective of this governor's pledge to go after 25%. So it's a good process to continue to do it and make sure they apply. I try to streamline them, and I salute you.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Secretary,
Yes, Mr.
so the good news is that instead of taking a year to get a period or a comment, it'll only take you 9 months.
We're working on it.
The 20,
We're working.
All right,
We're working.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and we
You know,
will see
the
you
truth
next
is, I
month.
shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. When it first started, I didn't know how the thing worked. And I had these emails, and I didn't know how to sign in, I couldn't figure it out, and like, I had like 20 things I needed to do, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is all this? And it comes to me before it ultimately goes to the governor, or the governor's office, and so, it's about getting on it quickly. It gets to me, I try to get it out now in a day or 2 or 3 at least, and move it along. But if you don't know how the process works, you're sort of, you're at a disadvantage, but I'm well familiar now. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, members.
The next item on the agenda, we finally get Ms. Farmer up. She's ready to rock. The Federal Transportation Grant Anticipation Notes, Series 2024. What we've all been waiting for this morning is a presentation.
So much hype. Yeah,
Ma'am,
I'm not known for rocking, but. sir,
welcome. Hope you're well this morning.
I am. Good morning. My first presentation today is a workshop item related to the issuance of Federal Transportation Grant Anticipation Notes, otherwise known as GARVs. They are to support projects that were authorized in a previous 6-year program. If you've been on the board a couple of years, you know the last couple of programs we've removed GARVs from the outlook going forward because with the infusion from the feds as well as the state funding, pursuing additional debt to support projects when we have cash flow, we don't have any cash flow concerns at the moment, didn't seem prudent at the time. And so these bonds will support projects that are actively underway now. Some are already in their construction phases and will reimburse the department for costs that we have incurred while they're underway. So in terms of the offering by the board, we anticipate pricing in October. The CTB debt in this category, we expect ratings in the AA category from the rating agencies as we have in previous years. They are reimbursed by federal revenue. We obligate federal funding associated with each project to pay for the debt service. The PAR we anticipate right now estimated at $123 million, but we hope that to have a project fund deposit of $137 to support the projects, and they'll have a maturity in 15 years. Just for some background on the Garvey program, back in 2011, Garveys were authorized by an act of the General Assembly to have an amount of $1.2 billion in outstanding Garveys at any given time. It limits the maturity to 20 years. As we've managed the Garvey program, we have sold those bonds with 15-year debt profiles. They're secured first by project-specific federal reimbursements, and any such other funds is designated by the General Assembly after the Transportation Trust Fund comes through if those other steps fail. We have a memorandum of agreement with the Federal Highway Administration that we monitor and update. It was executed in December of 2011, and then we reviewed it and provided some administrative updates in 2017. And then the Exhibit A of that agreement lists the projects in which we will apply Garveys to, and we update that based on each 6-year program update as bonds are allocated to projects. To date, the board has issued 7 series of Garveys since 2012 through 2020, and those issuances total just over $1.3 billion. Early on in the Garvey program, we supported the public contribution to several P3 projects. And then beginning in 2017, through the sale we made in 2020, bonds were used to support projects that were selected through Smart Scale. So they were a component of the total authorized program from both high priority and district grant. And that remains the case for this sale as well. The proceeds for this issuance will support projects that received Garveys in a prior 6-year program. So the bonds are secured, as I mentioned, by federal reimbursements, anything in the Transportation Trust Fund that is needed, and then anything designated by the General Assembly in that order. We've had no issues with the federal reimbursements and having plenty of coverage. The debt service coverage must have at least 4 times coverage. After this sale, our outstanding bonds will be just shy of $750 million, and our minimum debt coverage based on current federal revenue is 8.5 times coverage. So the sale is anticipated in October of this year with a project fund deposit of $137 million. This slide just provides the recent Garvey transactions. So the first column is the last time the board sold Garvey bonds in September of 2020 and the value of that. And then the remaining the remainder of the slide has 7 additional states that have had Garvey transactions in recent years, just for your perspective. In terms of next steps, we will bring to you a resolution for approval, the issuance of the bonds in July, with rating agencies to come after that. We go to Transportation Board, Treasury Board, in August, with receiving ratings later on after that, with the governor's approval and pricing and closing in October of this year. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that before we move on.
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Kasperowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Can you tell us what the anticipated interest rate will be on the bonds? I know it's hard to zero in on at this point, but what's the expectation?
I don't have the latest run for you, Mr. Kasperowitz, but I can get that and provide it back to you.
Yeah, it'd be helpful in comparison to the 7 prior offerings as well. I would imagine we're still in a very different interest rate environment. And do these bonds get sold into the general municipal bond market? Is that where they ultimately end up, or are they?
Yes, sir. We will leave the option open for a negotiated where they may have a retail sale period before opening that up, but right now we don't anticipate it. We usually have preferred, and with the reputation of the board's debt, we go out with a bond issuance in a competitive state, and the lowest TIC wins the bid.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I would note on page 6, if you look at the comparisons, I think it's always nice to see Virginia with such strong ratings. You know, obviously, we hang our hat on that in general, but it's always good to see it relative to our peers. Good work.
Thank you. And then tacked on to the end of this presentation, I just wanted to give you some brief primer on an action item that's on your agenda for this month. This item I consider to be administrative in nature. So throughout the board's term, we have permission to pursue refundings if the opportunity presents itself. And so on item 5 of your action agenda is an item to consider the ongoing issuance and sale of revenue refunding bonds. So the board is authorized to issue refunding bonds in the Code of Virginia. And historically, our debt is structured with a 10-year call date with some optional redemptions. So usually every 10 years after the debt has been issued, it's eligible for refunding if the market is right and we can save some money in debt service payments. So we monitor the situation with our financial advisor and identify any opportunities and notify the chair of the board if that exists. The existing resolution to allow us to monitor this and pursue a refunding without coming back to the board for approval expires at the end of this month. So the resolution allows us to refund some or all of the outstanding debt. It requires us to have a minimum debt service savings for any series of bonds that's no less than 3% present value on a present value basis compared to the existing debt service on the bonds that are being considered for refunding. And then any other threshold that's determined by the Treasury Board. So we would still take the offering to the Treasury Board for approval and report back to the CTB on the results. It also makes sure that the final maturity date of the refunding bond must not be later than the final maturity of the refunded bond. So we're not extending the debt service expectations of those bonds. So the process works is that once we identify the refunding opportunity, we notify the chair and submit a memo to the board identifying that opportunity. And then after the date of the issuance, within 60 days, a memo is provided to the CTB about what bonds we actually refunded, the terms and conditions, and the criteria, and we really outline the savings and present value to that transaction. We just did one recently this spring and had substantial savings to the Priority Transportation Fund as we refunded some CPR bonds. The resolution is drafted to be effective July 1st of this year and will terminate after 2 years on June 30th of 2026. With that, please let me know if you have any questions on this item.
Mr. Stamp.
Two quick questions. What entity is our financial advisor?
For all the CTB debt outside of Interstate 81 is PRAG, Public Resources Advisory Group.
And
we have the Treasury Board.
who are the members of the Treasury Board? Who are they appointed by? The Governor, General Assembly?
I believe they're all appointed by the governor with some agency heads on the finance side that serve on the board and headed by the Treasurer of Virginia.
Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Farmer.
Sir.
Going anywhere. Next item on the agenda is item 7. It's the FY 2025 budget and the 6-year improvement program. Excuse me, number 6, FY 2025-2030 CTF 6-year financial plan and VDOT budgets. Apologize, ma'am.
Problem. So June marks the completion of our work throughout the spring to balance the budgetary allocations to the resources being provided. And we briefed the board in April on the draft budgets and the draft 6-year programs for both VDOT and DRPT. And today we're here to provide an update on those final assumptions and the changes that we had since April. So, always, the 6-year financial plan identifies the planned funding across all modes of transportation that receive funding through the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. The preliminary 6-year financial plan allocates just under $55 billion. It includes the use of $795 million worth of debt for 81 and for Route 58. We also have transfers to the modal agencies of $5.8 billion, as well as directed revenue for the WMATA Capital Fund of $838 million. We also include the I-81 fuel tax revenue of $577 million. We've dedicated $16.5 billion to maintenance and operations and $16.98 billion for construction. Throughout the presentation, where the font has changed to green, it indicates a change since April. And I think I have explained all of the differences pretty thoroughly through the slides as we walk through, but please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. This slide provides a view of the Commonwealth Transportation revenue estimate that we've used for this forecast. It represents the December 2023 forecast without the proposed tax policy. There was a tax on digital items that was in the governor's proposed budget. This represents that revenue estimate less those amounts as they were not approved by the General Assembly and the governor. So in terms of revenue updates, since I was here with you in April, that represents a significant investment by the governor and the General Assembly into transportation with general fund dollars. As Joanne and Andy mentioned just before me, there is a significant investment in WMATA of $60.2 million in 2025 and $84.5 million in 2026. Joanne mentioned the $70 million for advancement of the I-81 corridor program in general fund dollars, and then $77 million and $24 million in 25 and 26 for eligible drivers for Elizabeth River crossings. And I have a little more detail there, and Joanne did cover the highlights earlier today. And other fund revenue, we support our Easy Pass operations and in violation enforcement for toll facilities. This is self-funded, but there's a net increase across the 6-year period. It's considered an administrative adjustment to keep up with the activity of those program areas. We also updated interest estimates and removed the anticipated Build America Bonds federal subsidy. So when we completed that recent refunding in the spring, we no longer count on the IRS reimbursing us for those interest earnings, but we do have tremendous ongoing savings, but we had to remove it as a revenue source in anticipated subsidies from the revenue service, from the IRS for those bonds. In terms of other revenue for I-81, we've incorporated the interest earnings to date in the program, as well as we have paid for our towing recovery program out of I-81 funding, and we've also gotten some of those reimbursements back, either through the insurance company or the person at fault, and so this provides a credit back to I-81 for use on the corridor. The total of those two items is just over $10 million for I-81. And then in terms of federal revenue, we have additional federal earmarks totaling $83.7 that was provided in the recent budget actions this spring, and they've been incorporated into the program. So this slide just provides a view of where those dollars have changed across the revenue picture and the differences to last year's 6-year program. In terms of allocations, the General Assembly had considered a budgetary proposal from the governor to provide $50 million per year for Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund, and we had planned that $200 million total investment over fiscal years 26 through 29. What was approved by the General Assembly is $15 million per year, and based on the enacting language, we can do that over a 5-year period in the program, or for a total of $75 million instead of $200. What that means is a net increase to the modal distribution. So we're not holding $200 million off the top now, we're holding 75. And so across the 6-year period, there's a net increase to all the modes. We also updated the special structures allocation. We corrected the program growth from what was originally in the base based on a formula issue in our assumptions. This resulted in a net increase in the funding for special structures, and you'll see that later today when Kim presents the 6-year improvement program. In terms of debt service, we updated the Garvey debt service estimates based on the timing of the bonds and shifts among fiscal years. There's a net increase in federal funding available for formula distribution as a result of this change.
We have minor updates in agencies and transfers, just as we analyze the base budget provided by the General Assembly and the support we provide to others. Those amounts have been updated. And then in the last couple of months, I've talked to you about the paving funding needed to achieve our performance targets. So last month, we talked about additional money for our maintenance program totaling $202.5 million for supplementing the funding for fiscal year 2025, and then the corresponding share for localities of $61.5 million. We also incorporated the impact of pay raises to our maintenance program in fiscal year 25 and 26. Across all the other administrative programs, the department has implemented the impact of pay raises as well. In those years, it was 3% in each year, in the summer of each fiscal year. In toll programs, the general fund dollars have been incorporated, as well as the Easy Pass operations I mentioned earlier. In public transportation, there's the allocation of the general fund money for WMATA, and updated distributions based on the available transportation trust funds from the CTF. So that TPOF adjustment I mentioned earlier is a net increase for across the modes, across the 6-year planning period. And the same goes for all of the other sister agencies. There's a net change available from the Transportation Trust Fund. And then the federal revenue is reflected with the Rail Authority. So there's some CMAQ funding that's being provided to the Rail Authority, and that is reflected in these allocation adjustments. In terms of construction, the allocation of the federal earmarks is found within our construction program. That $83.7 million is inclusive of a $42 million earmark for I-81 as well. The additional funding also for I-81 of $70 million, as well as the interest earnings and other revenue I mentioned earlier, is also reflected in construction. And then that reduced allocation to Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund from $200 down to $75 million over the period is also reflected in our construction changes. Those items that affect state and federal funding available for formula distribution impact the distribution of funding for construction. And so from the draft 6-year program to the final, the table at the bottom of this slide summarizes those differences year by year. The largest change in year 1 is primarily due to the one-time monies in maintenance and what they represent and how they impact crossover. And so that means it's less money for construction. And then the other actions free up a little bit of money throughout the remainder of the 4 years going further out for a total net change of a reduction of $51.6 million. Kim can provide additional details, but primarily we had funding on balance entries waiting for the next round of Smart Scale. And so that is primarily where the adjustments came from as they went from draft to final. Joanne provided a good overview of the toll relief funding for Elizabeth River crossings earlier. I just wanted to highlight it one more time and give you some perspective about the work in front of us. As mentioned earlier, for the additional relief for up to 100% of relief for 14 trips across the facility, you must earn less than $50,000 a year, and your primary residence is in the planning district that meets certain criteria. As written in the chapter, that currently makes 5 localities eligible in the region. So the additional funding that's provided in this, we do not believe that the entire amount is needed to fund toll relief between now and 2036, is efforts by the commissioner to negotiate with Elizabeth River Crossings on outstanding debt that customers had that is held with Elizabeth River Crossings as of December 31st of 2023, and that is subject to negotiations with ERC. And so that work is beginning. In addition, the department is working with the Department of Taxation to set up income validation procedures to validate the income level of prospective applicants. And those couple of things combined, we will implement on or before January 1st of 2025. So with all those updates in mind related to allocations, there's a significant update on this slide. Some of these are minor in terms of single decimal points or major in terms of several $1 million related to adjustments by program area. But I've walked through all of those major changes in the previous slides. In terms of the Commonwealth Transportation Fund budget, isolating the first year of the plan, the 2025 recommended budget totals just over $10 billion. That is an increase of 2.5% over the budget approved last year. And the pie chart represents the major revenue sources that make up that budget. Slide provides the recommended allocation distribution. Maintenance funding represents about 28.5% of the total budget, with construction at 37.6%, and then rail and public transportation at 9.6%. The slide just serves as a reminder of the distribution required by the Code of Virginia, as well as the recommended allocations that are distributed throughout this budget. And as a reminder, before we get to the HMOF deficit, and so if funds are insufficient in terms of the recommended allocations for a highway maintenance and operating fund, there's a scheduled transfer from construction or other funds made available for the HMOF. And so on the next slide, we talk about that related to the expected deficit for fiscal year 2025. Totals $829 million, of which 319 are federal funding and 510 million are state funds for fiscal year 2025. This provides a view of that crossover, where we've been over the last couple of fiscal years. Since the draft, we've worked on providing some additional federal funding to our maintenance program, so that's where you see an increase to 318. We were around the $283 million number in terms of the draft that you saw in April. And those changes made for paving and pay raises and other things that affect HMOF needs drive the state fund transfer up to about $510 million for a total of $828.7.
Mr. Secretary?
Ms. Hines.
Mr. Commissioner, can you just help us understand the actual impact of needing to send $509 million over to maintenance on the construction program? What will it mean we'll do less of?
Laura, can you take a crack at that?
Sure. So those adjustments that I described earlier, there was always a planned crossover. And then as we provide additional resources on the maintenance side, those are the items where we're going in and taking out. Because we are in a year in which Smart Scale is not in play, that doesn't affect current projects underway, because Kim and the management of her staff, they have resources available in balance entries across the program. However, if we continue to need this, right, we've been handling this 1 year at a time. If we make a more permanent adjustment, the likelihood it'll be felt in the future across construction projects is high, but at the same time, we have a commitment to deliver. But what that means is to push schedules, which may mean increased cost.
Right, and less money in district grant and high priority.
Both.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
All the above. Back to the previous slide. So, Ms. Hines, I mean, we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting as well. You know, we have a saying, a motto, a policy that says maintenance comes first, right? And this board has worked with the commissioner and his staff over numbers of years to set targets for maintenance, for pavement conditions, even going to localities and their pavement conditions now, but bridges and ditching and culverts and all sorts of things that we now measure and try to say this is where we need to be. And that drives spending for maintenance. And it's a balance, you know, I mean, obviously our roads are not going to be pristine and they're not going to be perfect because that costs way more money than it's worth. but they need to be reasonable, they need to be safe, they need to be reasonably well-maintained. And those numbers have gone up naturally, right? At the same time, we talked about, and we referenced it earlier today, we talked about it last month. Mr. Stant used a number about 5 billion, but I think it's closer to 7. Ham Roads is going to spend $7 billion, and they're going to spend it on building new roads. And that's not in the regular formula, and it doesn't drive anything to maintenance. And their budgets continue to pump out new roads and new projects, and there's no provision of those funds being used for maintenance. So we keep building a bigger house, a bigger house, a bigger house, because our uncle in these regional partnerships, or our aunt, keeps giving us money, but they don't give us any money to maintain it. And so it's exacerbating the problem that we already have. And so as more dollars have poured into the system, you can see we've given 3% raises. That's eating into that number as well. Certainly on the private sector side, as rates, as salaries and wages have gone up, that drives their prices up. So we're in this place where we don't really like to be. And at some point, if it continues like this, as I've discussed with the commissioner and Laura and others, at some point we're going to have to say, is this funding formula, are the percentages right? And are we going to have to slow down construction to be able to maintain what we have? Or do we change funding formulas, and what do we do? So I think your point is well taken. What it means is that there's less construction than there would have been. That's what it means.
That
There's not a
VDOT, that
specific-
VDOT is doing.
That VDOT's doing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, your folks in Northern Virginia and the folks in Central Virginia and the folks in Ham Roads are all cranking out these projects. So we've got lots of things to sort of say grace to and figure out. But at the end of the day, between general inflation, the piece within the state that's taking money out to fund salaries and other things, the numbers of projects that are coming on that don't have a regular funding stream for maintenance, and our push, frankly, to do what we say and have maintenance first and have our roads be well maintained. And so all those things are coming together, and it's going to create some difficulty for us going forward. So I think
Well, you look at that jump from.
you pointed at it.
Yeah.
And I'm just,
Yeah, this is something that I've worried about for quite some time, and we have some opportunity. We have new chairmen on the transportation committees. We have some opportunity to sort of point out 10 years after 2313 passed, a lot of the pent-up demand for additional capacity certainly in Nova and in Hampton is being addressed. And there's this ancillary problem that is now becoming much clearer as these roads become older, that maintaining them the first 5 years, not so much a problem. Get older, it gets worse. And I just think that this is the biggest issue that actually faces this board over the next couple of years, is how to tell this story in a way that says, maintenance, VDOT has a role in both maintenance and construction. We have major parts of the Commonwealth that do not have regional authorities where, money needs to be spent. And you have longstanding promises to the regions that have regional authorities that they will not get less than their fair share of the state dollars. And so this is it is one of the most important questions that needs to be teed up and thought through. And
I would tell you, we're acutely aware and are working on it and looking at it. But yeah, your point's well taken. So we basically opened a spigot for funding for construction. The federal government opened a spigot, and prices are going up all at the same time. And so we're pushing the cost structure. We're trying to make sure we're really doing our maintenance as we say we're doing it. And at the same time, we got a lot more construction that's gonna need to be maintained. And listen, maintenance costs go up, but you still got to ditch, you still got to cut grass, you still got to pick up litter on day 200, not, at year 10. So it drives all those costs. And I was beating up a guy the other day, one of our engineers, and I was saying, we have to do a little bit better on our maintenance. Just stuff laying on the road and, just sort of that kind of thing. And all that takes money, right? It's all very expensive.
Need good people.
And we need good people.
So
We need to pay them enough to be there.
About that pay issue
So,
as well.
when you saw the impact of the 6% raise, it's substantial. There's a lot of people that work in the organization, right? And you give everybody a 6% raise, which is well-deserved and appropriate, I think, but boom, it's a lot of money gone. So that's where we are, Ms. Stant.
Real quick, I was struck by the first slide that as long as I've been on the board, construction had always been a lot higher than maintenance in the 6-year plan. This year, 16.5 billion for maintenance, 16.9 for construction. And it looks like to me that that's going to switch around maybe next year, pretty soon here.
It's not the first time we have, Mr. Stant, we've fought this. And it probably won't be the last, but it's real. Yes, sir. Someone else? Ms. Sellers?
Kind of to what Ms. Hines was getting at, I think it was last meeting, the commissioner said, we got to start looking at the decisions local governments are making that impact some of these schedules. And when you think about our time on local government and the decisions that you make, particularly those transportation studies, think about any time that you discussed maintenance. We never thought about maintenance. It was always the construction of a new road. Never once did you ever think, how in the world are you going to maintain this road? How are you going to maintain this sidewalk? And half the time, local governments completely ignore what VDOT says, and it's a recommendation, if they even do it. And what I'm seeing now at local levels is they don't even have to necessarily do a transportation study. And so some of these rezonings and some of these land use things, big applications are coming through without even requiring to go through the VDOT process. And so we are seeing things at the local level where it's not even going through the process. And that's what we're seeing in Stafford and Spotsylvania County. And so after the fact, they're coming through and it's like, how in the world did this happen? Very large reclassifications that are having major impacts on our roads, and that are getting some very big attention here. So just some things to think about when you look at maintenance. So my question that I would be interested is, are we seeing some places that are doing worse than others, or that are more egregious than others? And can we start to talk to them and say, hey, you need to do better? Because we are seeing high growth areas. Stafford, Spotsy are probably two of them. I'll put them out there because I know their land use process is better. But, are they taking those into consideration? The other thing is in rezonings, we talk about level of service, which is, does traffic move through an intersection? But you don't talk about, again, the quality of the road or does it work or anything like that. So and that's not something I've heard since I've been on the CTB, but again, at the local level, those are things we talk about, is getting cars through the intersection. So we use different terminology here in Richmond than the locals use when they talk about roads. So that could also be causing some of the problems, is we use different metrics, maybe's the word, I don't know, but some things.
All right, anyone else?
So this slide just provides the recommended allocations for VDOT's budget by program area. They're highlighted green based on the changes I've described to you to this point. And then there's detailed allocation breakdowns in the budget documents that are received. There are attachments to the budget resolution. And I would refer you to those if you had any other questions or concerns. And I'm here to answer any additional questions. If not, I do have a follow-up from Mr. Caswood's Garvey question earlier.
And I will say, when you look at this, you should at least add back special structures when you look at it. I mean, that's a construction pot. It was taken off the top. So if you want to sort of compare over time, that's a construction bucket that didn't exist until 2020, 2021, something like that. So there's another $85 million that you really should think about as construction, because that's what it is. Farmer, do you disagree?
I would just say that most of those activities are rehabbing and providing major updates to existing infrastructure, which in a normal day we'd call maintenance. And then some of those that cannot be replaced are scheduled, or that cannot be rehabbed or scheduled for replacement later, which is construction. Yes, sir.
Let me say this. The ones that are going to be replaced are going to be a big, huge chunk of the number.
Yes, sir.
Secretary.
Dr. Smoot.
Laura, thank you. And would you provide a quick overview of what's in the $162 million reduction to regional programs?
That's just their money, isn't it? That's just their money flow.
Yes, sir. So the revenue update budget over budget year is the estimated changes in the revenue sources for HR TAC, NVTA, and CVTA that come through the department. And so year over year, they did have some reductions. We also incorporate changes from the year that we're in. If there are allocation adjustments based on the revenue estimate, we incorporate those too. So it's
Is a lot of that fuel tax driven?
Sales tax. Well,
sales tax, I think, was the bulk of the reduction. I can confirm the components of each, but yes, sir, both pieces are the same for Hampton Roads and Central Virginia. And then in Northern Virginia, it's a combination of retail sales tax as well as the transit occupancy fee and one more source I can't think of off the top of my head.
Thank you.
What else? All right, thank you, Ms. Farmer.
Yes, sir. Mr. Caswitz, to your earlier question about Garveys and their rate, a friend has helped me. So based on rates as of June 6th, we anticipate a TIC of 3.47, and that would actually be the highest rate across all Garvey issuances to date of the board, just in terms of where rates are today. The next highest over our history is back in 2013 of 3.18.
Interesting. That doesn't surprise me, but that's a great bond, actually, AA rating with that, that interest rate, double
Yes, sir.
tax-free.
Yes,
Should
sir.
be very
We still do
popular.
very well, so thank you.
Anyone else with questions for Ms. Farmer? Thank you, ma'am. I think we're at a good place to break for lunch. It's 12:15. Lunch is available for the board. Let's just move on through and be back here by 1 o'clock. Does that work for everybody? All right. Well, we will be in recess till 1 p.m. Well, good afternoon. I'm going to call this meeting back into order. This is the workshop meeting, the June 17th workshop meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And our next agenda item is agenda item number 7, the FY 2025 Budget and 6-Year Improvement Program. Ms. Deanna O'Wary, CFO of DRPT. How are you? Good morning.
I'm doing well,
I guess
thank you.
it's afternoon now, isn't it?
It is afternoon.
Good
Yep.
afternoon. Hope
Good
you're well.
afternoon. Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to present today the final FY 25-30 SIP for the DRPT projects as well as our FY 25 budget. And then I'm going to highlight throughout the presentation just the changes that have been made from the draft version to the final version of the SIP. So just as a recap and resetting for everyone, this was our 25-30 6-year improvement timeline. It's a zigzag pattern. So we started in November of 2023 when our rail and transit teams held workshops for our grantees. We received applications between December 1 and February 1st. Then our staff reviewed the applications and proposals, came to the board on April 16th, to present the draft SIP, held public meetings between the 20th and 16th of May, where we received public comment on the SIP and on the various projects, and made some changes or improvements based on, where appropriate, based on the comments from the community. And then today I'm here presenting the final SIP for your consideration. So just a summary of why we're updating the SIP today. We take into account the impact of the FY 25-26 Appropriations Act and other smaller project level developments. So we go back and we review all of the projects that were in the draft form, and we notice some things that might need to be adjusted. We go through a process of refining our estimates with CMAQ and RSTP when we work with VDOT. So there are a number of things that would have impacted our numbers between when we presented in April and today, and so I'll go into some of those details as well. But as you've heard earlier this morning, there was a general fund appropriation for WMATA that is being administered by DRPT. So we have $60.2 million in the SIP for fiscal 25 and $84.5 million in the SIP for 26. As well, I believe that Ms. Farmer also talked about the CTF funding that goes to the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund, TPOF. So because of this off-the-top funding, there was a modest reduction in the 2025 allocation for our public transit and rail programs, but in total over the 6 years, there's more revenue coming in from the program based on the revenue estimates in the final version. And so for the modest reduction in 2025, in order to keep our program balances whole relative to what was improved in the draft, we did rely on program balances for certain funds. So, for example, we didn't make any reductions to our operating or capital assistance projects because we had prior year dollars that were deobligated, and so we used those dollars to basically keep the several program areas whole relative to what was presented in the draft in April. However, there are two appropriations or allocations that I'll show in an upcoming slide. The WMATA and VRE allocations, they received their entire allocation from DRPT each year per the formula in statute. WMATA gets 46.5%, VRE 3.5%, and so there is no unobligated or deobligated balance for those two entities. So you'll see a slight decrease in FY 25 for those two entities. And again, the TPOF opportunity, the off-the-top funding for the related to TPOF impacts fiscal 25, but in the large span of the 6 years, there's more money will be going to those entities. Okay, so this is just a summary of the total SIP from the prior year, which is 24-29, compared to what we presented in the middle was our draft presentation in April, and then the final SIP that I'm presenting today. So the change really is from the draft to final. Our transit allocations grew by $221 million, and this is over the 6 years. Rail by $9 million, and then the total was $230 million. So now I want to talk about the fiscal 2025 SIP, transit SIP by program areas. So as I mentioned, we kept the operating assistance and our capital assistance whole based on prior year balances, so there's no change from draft to final. And the change column actually does represent the change from draft to final, not from 24 to 25 final. So it's draft final change. And so, as I mentioned, the WMATA allocation is going to be reduced in the first year, but over the long term, 6 years, there's more money that will be coming to WMATA. But there's a reduction in the 2025 year. WMATA also receives its general fund appropriation for operating assistance, and the dedicated WMATA and PREA match for WMATA are unchanged from draft to final. VRE has a slight reduction in 2025. Again, that's due to the TPOF adjustment. And as I believe I mentioned this in April, but just to refresh, VRE didn't receive a specific or a particular allocation from DRPT prior to this current fiscal year, or prior to 2025. So there's nothing to put there. They did, I believe, receive close to $13.5 million in FY24, but it was not part of an allocation. We did uncover, as we reviewed our projects and received input from different stakeholders, a small adjustment on the commuter assistance programs. There was no adjustment to our paratransit assistance allocation for 2025 or the state safety oversight for 2025. And the FTA state administered program funds, we had a slight increase in the cost of the vehicles for our FTA 5310 program, and so we incorporated or added a little bit more money to that particular line item to pay for the increased vehicle cost. And as well, the local funds match that 5310 program from the FTA, and so their share of match also went up a little bit to account for the increased cost in the vehicles. For the TRIP project, we noticed an issue with one of the projects was counted twice, so we removed that, and that's why there's a reduction there. I mentioned that we refined a lot of the CMAQ RSTP projects and worked with VDOT to get those final estimates for fiscal 25, so that's why those numbers are more solid in this version of the SIP. And then the state match for from the Transportation Trust Fund is what we receive from VDOT, and that matches the CMAQ and RSTP, so that goes up as well as those allocations went up. And there was no change in our I-395 toll funds or the I-66 outside the Beltway toll fund allocation. So in total, our draft SIP was $834 million for transit projects, and we're going to $906 million, about a $72 million change from draft to final for transit.
Question, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Merrill.
Could you explain what the congestion mitigation air quality dollars are going to?
So these are programs that are dollars that we receive from VDOT and Federal Highway Administration, and they're transit-related federal highway projects. And there's a list. I don't have it all memorized in front of me, and maybe there's someone that could maybe comment a little bit more on this. But there are projects that are outlined in the SIP document that's in your packet. It's a list, and it shows all the projects that we're funding from CMAQ and RSTP.
You know if it's intended to reduce vehicle miles traveled, or is it to, because that's a pretty big jump from 7 million in the draft to 16 million.
This is just a long-standing federal program, and it has many components to it. Certainly, just any way to reduce congestion. I mean, you see things like just mass transit, as well as anything to help air quality. Really is really what it comes down to as well. But it's a long-standing federal program that we've gotten money from for years. So it's really a catch-all for a lot of things, actually, from my experience. But the regions actually program this money at the MPO levels lots of times, so they go to transit as well. So it's all over the state.
Mr. Merrill, if you'd like we'll get you a breakdown, show you more.
That's a big jump from,
Well, the big jump is because the feds increased the funding for the program. So that's where the jump came from.
They gave us more money.
So for our rail programs, while the Commonwealth Rail Fund also saw a modest reduction in FY25 related to the off-the-top adjustment for TPOF, we did use unobligated balances to keep the DRPT projects whole. So there is no change between what we presented in April for our rail projects versus what we're presenting today. And then the one change that I will highlight, money that we do pass through to VPRA from the Commonwealth Rail Fund. The change here, the 8.75 million, just represents some, the final estimate that I believe VDOT and VPRA used to determine the I-66 inside the Beltway pay-go estimate for fiscal '25. So if you were to add in that column that says final column, the 190.6 million, the 18.226 million, and the 906, we are investing we are allocating in fiscal 2025 over $1.114 billion for rail and public transit projects. Okay. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and comment on our budget for fiscal '25, which is different from the SIP because our budget, just as a reminder, is our cash flow analysis based on anticipated expenditures that we will receive over the next fiscal year, so over fiscal year '25. So there's some overlap between the allocations, but those are based on the revenue estimates, and the budget, which is based on our spending and what we expect to pay in the next fiscal year. So I have the slide that shows the FY24 budget was a little over $1.40 billion. And then the draft SIP that we presented in FY25 was 1.149 million. And then the final SIP is a little over 1.2 million. The main difference here is the transit line, and that's really due to the WMATA piece that is the general fund piece that's coming out from WMATA. And then the VPRA adjustment is just some of the, like I mentioned previously, they also receive Commonwealth Rail funds. So there was a modest reduction in the amount that will go to VPRA due to the TPOF portion. So just really high level, we're investing $1.2 billion in state, federal, and local resources for public transportation and rail capacity projects across the Commonwealth. The transit budget, as you saw on the previous slide, was $983.2 million. That's $146.8 million more than 2024, and that's driven by the amounts from WMATA on the general fund, and then an increase in capital project costs that we're expecting due to continuous betterments of the whole supply chain issue and capital projects just being able to move faster, hopefully in 2025. The rail budget is $42.5 million, and that's funding for all of the freight, rail, and planning projects, short line preservation, and rail industrial access programs. That's about a $17 million increase over the prior fiscal year. And then our DRPT admin budget, we're using 3.9% of the budget for our program management, administration, and compliance. And then also the VPRA receives 93% of revenue from the Commonwealth Rail Fund, and that's $162.9 million in FY25. And this is just a quick chart or pie graph just showing how we're paying or what's funding the budget for fiscal '25. You can see the largest chunks of the budget are from transportation trust fund dollars, which are dedicated. You'll see the sliver in orange that represents the $60.2 million in general fund money. And then just to keep it in perspective, you'll see like in the top right, you'll see the portion that we get from federal dollars. Again, most of the money comes from the Transportation Trust Fund for the transit projects. And then next steps for us, once the board takes action, we will have this document and the SIP posted on our website at our open data portal. And then we'll begin to write contracts and get the money out to our local recipients. So that is the end of my presentation. Happy to take questions.
Ms. Kasperowitz.
Can we flip back to the pie chart that was on the slide before? So the total funds from the 66,395 or $30 million for the 25 budget. That comes from the tolling revenue that we're deriving on the two sections that we're self-managing. I just want to point that out to all board members, but especially new board members. That was a change in direction that was taken several years ago that's providing some great revenue for this type of funding, and it's working very, very well. So just an observation that good decisions and good management are bringing us some additional funding in this case.
Anybody else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The man of the hour. We are on agenda item number 8, the VPRA capital budget update. And our executive director, Mr. DJ Statler, is here.
Good afternoon,
With
Mr.
lots of good news from the last meeting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good
Welcome.
afternoon, Mr.
Good
Secretary,
afternoon.
members of the board. It's good to see everybody. I'm here today to give you an update on our capital budget. Hopefully it will be brief. Just a overview of why I'm here. As I think folks know, we, VPRA, currently sponsor rail going out along the Manassas line. Part of that rail travel is VRE on the Manassas line. They've got 16 trains a day going each way, and then we also have 2 state-supported passenger trains that go currently to Roanoke, and we have a plan to extend those trains to Christiansburg. There are also a couple Amtrak long-distance trains that are on that route. We had made a deal with Norfolk Southern a few years back to extend the service to Christiansburg and also to add a second Roanoke train. That second Roanoke train is in place. We found out, as we presented to you all earlier this year, that our solution to get to Christiansburg was much more expensive than we expected. We went back to Norfolk Southern. We said, hey, is there a cheaper way to do this? Let's work together. To their credit, they were very open to discussing with us. We have come to a tentative deal with them to change that project, which I'll be discussing today, but we think it's a good news deal, and we're here today to give you the details on that. So technically why I am here, anytime we change our capital budget, we've got to get approval from the CTB. You all approved our 25 budget back in February. I guess back in March, we workshopped it in February. This is a change to our budget, so we're bringing it to you. Additionally, anytime we dispose of any railroad asset that has a value of more than $5 million, we need your approval. So we are coming to you for conditional approval. We'll ask for it at next month at the action meeting, assuming everything continues on track, no pun intended. But those are the 2 reasons why I'm here today. So some background for you. May 5th, 2021, my 6th day on the job, we had a huge announcement in Roanoke to talk about our deal with Norfolk Southern that would give us the second train to Roanoke and also extend the service to Christiansburg. We were excited about that. At that point, this project was at approximately 0% design. That's a number that has haunted us for years, 0% design. Between that date and earlier this year, we took the project from 0% to 30%. This map shows you going from right to left, taking you from Roanoke further west to Christiansburg, all of the improvements that were necessary to get passenger rail along the V line to Christiansburg. Some improvements in the Roanoke Yard that were being done by Norfolk Southern, some work at the Salem crossover also being done by Norfolk Southern, and then what we had to do on the Virginia line that we purchased, we had the Slate Hill Tunnel, we had the Merrimack Tunnel, which needed significant improvements, safety improvements to ensure that passenger travel would be safe. As we went through that work, we came back to our board in January of this year and then to you all in February and outlined 3 options. Option 1 was to go to Cinnabar, which is just to the east of that Merrimack Tunnel. That was going to cost us $366 million, which is about $200 million more than we expected it to. Alternative B would have us go through that Merrimack Tunnel, improve the tunnel, and then stop at the mall site. That would be $785 million. And then the C alternative would be to do a temporary stop in Cinnabar at 2028 and then get to the mall in 2030. That would be just south of $1 billion. So those are the options in front of us. Candidly, none of them really great. As I said earlier, we looked at those options and said there's got to be a better solution. Norfolk Southern, let's do something different. repeating myself, to their credit, they were a great partner, and the teams have worked very well over the last few months to come up with a new solution. Here is what that solution is. We would take the money that's currently in our budget, no additional funds, and we would shift the Christiansburg service from the Virginian line, where it was proposed, onto the main line. Originally, Norfolk Southern did not want us on the main line because they have a lot of freight traffic there, and passenger trains and freight trains are very different models. They didn't want to be on the same line. Things have changed at Norfolk Southern, and now they were willing to have these conversations with us. So we would move that passenger service to the main line going to Christiansburg. We would sell Norfolk Southern the Virginian line back, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. And Norfolk Southern would be responsible for building the platform and the station stop, not the station building, but the station location there at the Cambria site, which is coincidentally where passenger rail was served in Christiansburg from 1906 until 1979. I think Dr. Smoot took about 100 trains from that station. So Norfolk Southern would build that facility there. Better solution for Christiansburg, and it actually gets you there a little faster. In addition, we would take the money that we were going to spend on the Cinnabar site, which is in a much more remote location. It would work, but the grade is bad, the water plane is bad, it's just not an ideal solution. We would take that money and purchase the Manassas line. So the Manassas line is the Norfolk Southern Railroad that goes from Alexandria, Northern Virginia, out west to about Broad Run. That would give Virginia, the Commonwealth, control over the slots there with VRE, give us a lot more consistency and predictability on what we pay for VRE and Amtrak service there. It gives us, as the slide says, long-term operational flexibility. We have a term sheet, a non-binding term sheet, but Norfolk Southern has agreed, we've agreed. What we're going to do over the course of the summer is get the Cambria solution to 30% design. And once we get to 30% design, if it fits within the schedule, fits within the budget, we would then have a comprehensive rail agreement with them to move forward with this new solution. Here's just a map showing, you saw the old line is the Virginia line up top. B is where the Cinnabar station would have been. A is the mall site, so that's on the other side of the long tunnel. And what we're proposing in this deal is to go instead to C, which is the old Cambria site. Again, the historic station. We would actually purchase the historic station building where passenger rail went way back when. So that is the map. Here is the impact on our budget. So on the left column, you see our approved budget. That's what you all approved earlier this year. The big number there is the 366 for the Cinnabar location, and that was the lowest. We were still evaluating whether we would take that one or spend even more money to go further. What we're doing is shifting a lot of that money to the bottom line, which is the Manassas line purchase, the second column. As you can see, the net change is zero. We're not adding any money to our budget, not taking any money from our budget, but we're reallocating it so we get a station stop in Christiansburg faster, in a better location, and we'd use the money that was going to be used for Cinnabar to buy the Manassas line. That was fast, but any questions about the budget impact?
Folks.
I'm confused. Is that these proposed changes, does that result in earlier completion of the site in Christiansburg, did I understand?
It does, yes, sir.
And what is the expected completion date?
The expected completion date, we will not know for certain until
Don't tell him.
Gets to 30% design. So the secretary has informed me I cannot issue any schedule or budget until 30% design. Now,
Mr. Folks,
2025?
we've been chasing for a few years now a very well-intentioned, very exuberant announcement where we had not done enough homework. And the folks in that part of the world have been disappointed ever since.
Right.
As we dug in and found numbers that we didn't like, both in terms of dollars and time. And so you heard your former director and chairman, Ms. DeBrule, say that she would never do that again. And we're not going to do that again. But we're going to tell you, sort of tell you it's going to be before the other one, and it's going to cost, it is going to cost what it's going to cost. The good news here, just to sort of jump in front, I'm sorry, Ms. Stadler.
you're in charge, sir.
none of this is in stone until the end of the summer. And by that time, we will be assured that we will be at 30% design and understand schedule and dollars. And if we find a bunch of stuff that's crazy, it doesn't make any sense and blows this thing all up in terms of numbers, then we're gonna have some more discussion about it. But right now, it looks really good. And we've got some time to do our due diligence, which frankly, they didn't have before. So they wanted to get it announced for obvious reasons. They announced it, and then as we started digging, it got difficult. Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
All right, so it's gonna be sooner,
Okay,
and it's gonna be a lot better.
right. I totally agree with the new plan. The other question I had is, had we purchased the Virginian line already?
Yes.
And it's being sold back to, is there a purchase price on that, or is that the like-kind exchange with a Manassas line?
Let me go to the next slide.
Okay.
Here's the Virginia line. So yes,
All right.
we did indeed purchase the Virginia line back in 2022, and we paid $38.2 million for that line. In the meantime, we've done about $14 million worth of improvements out of our Virginia money. And so what we're doing is we're selling it back to Norfolk Southern, adding about a 5% inflation factor for $54.3 million. So we're being made whole on that purchase plus the improvements that we've put into it.
Why does Norfolk Southern want the Virginian line?
Because they like us.
No, sir, I wouldn't agree with that comment, sir.
Yeah.
Because they still use it for freight traffic.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Okay.
You're also trying to make this deal work. If you can, back up a slide, please. That one. And I don't know if you're gonna, address this or not, DJ. But where's the one that shows the tunnels?
So,
Is
yeah,
that
that's,
further
it's the
back?
same line, the tunnels just aren't
Yeah,
there.
it's
So if
just
you
not,
look
it's
at-
right there, okay. So on the V line with Cinnabar, we were gonna stop short of the major problem, right? Being, and I guess that's the Merrimack Tunnel, correct?
Correct, that's correct.
So we were moving the tunnel on the east side of the Merrimack, we were moving the station to the east side of the Merrimack Tunnel because the Merrimack Tunnel was such a problem, right? Well, what that means is to go any further south or west, you still got the problem, right? When we move to the end line, that all goes away. So that tunnel's no longer in our way for the future, and that's important. The future's a ways out, and going beyond Christiansburg. It's a fair ways out likely, but there's no big impediment called that tunnel in front of us. And so we've eliminated that. If we are able to finalize this, we've eliminated that obstacle as well, which is critically important.
So for my constituency in the Bristol district, just to clarify, because we're going back to the main line of the Norfolk Southern, if that were ever extended to Bristol, we have no impediments, as you mentioned, the tunnels. Is that correct?
We don't have that impediment.
The
There
tunnel
may be
impediment.
others, but we were going to have
Yeah.
the others anyway.
But that was a big deal.
Yeah, because the V line comes back into the main line ultimately, right?
Okay.
So we're sort of on a subsidiary line, if you will. And along that line, to get back to where we needed to go to get to you, we had to go through that Merrimack Tunnel, which was a big problem.
I think it's a big plus. I think.
Right.
Sir, if I may, you're exactly right. We were originally going to go through that Merrimack Tunnel on the left, which is a mile long, and then we were going to cut into that purplish line, the Blacksburg branch, which then takes you to the main line. So we would have to build that connection as well. Between the safety issues in the tunnel that were much more expensive and significant than we thought, and then also the amount of dirt that had to be moved to do that connection track, it was very expensive to get back on that main line.
Thank you very much.
Certainly. And so again, as you can see from this map, the The new proposal would be to go down the main line, which is the N line, right into Christiansburg, and then you're on the main line going further south, when and if. And then just back to the V line, this is, as I said earlier, we would be selling the V line back to Norfolk Southern. What happens next, we have a non-binding term sheet that would have us buy the Manassas line and return the Virginia line to Norfolk Southern. We are working with Norfolk Southern diligently to get to 30% design, which we should have in the middle of August. We also, because we'd be acquiring a railroad, have to file with the Surface Transportation Board. That's a non-binding filing. That filing went in place on June 6th, and it's out there. Norfolk Southern is working with us again to get to 30% design to make sure the main line is feasible for us. What comes next, we continue to negotiate the final comprehensive rail agreement that we would sign if this comes to fruition. We will come back to you all in July at the action meeting with an update, and then to conditionally get approval to give this V line or sell this V line back and make this change to our budget. And then we meet with our board at the August meeting, at which point we will have a path forward. It's either the main line with this transaction, or we'd go back to the Cinnabar option. An important piece to note is that if for some reason the main line gets to 30% and the schedule's out of whack or the cost is out of whack, we've only lost a few weeks on the Cinnabar site. We paused all the work there. We haven't stopped it, but we paused it for now. We can start that up if this doesn't turn out to be a good solution. Any questions or comments?
Gentlemen, ladies, any questions?
Just one, Secretary.
Yes, sir, Mr. Merrill.
How was the price for the Manassas line developed? Did it just happen to be the amount of money that we had appropriated?
No, the original appraisal, so we had spoken with Norfolk Southern about buying the Manassas line back in 2020 and 2021, and their initial appraised value was well north of $500 million. We're getting it for about $366 now. We've worked back and forth on what's included, what's not included, so that's been a big part of negotiation over the last few months.
Mr. Merrill, let me say this. There was two appraisals back in the day. We negotiated based on those and other factors. And the hard stop is we're not spending any more money than we already have.
That became a floor for us, or a ceiling for us.
That was my ceiling. Right? So when this is all, the concept here is when this is all said and done, right, we spend no more money than we had budgeted for this whole concept. We're off a much inferior line onto a much superior line, not only because of the line itself, but because of how it continues to go south and west. And we've acquired something that we wanted but could not get in terms of the Manassas line that brings great value, particularly as we move into the future with VRE, additional trains, and we own and dispatch and control, or at least we own the dispatching and control that line now, which has a huge impact. So at the end of the day, the budgets are going to remain more or less the same at the bottom, if not better, and we're just going to have a much better situation. Now, why did that occur? That occurred because lots of things were going on, including likely pressures on Norfolk Southern. They had an opportunity for some tax, like kind of exchange tax situations. And so everything sort of came together at once. And so we're in a really good place, because if we're not, we walk away and go back to where we were. But I think DJ and his team and Director DeBurle and everybody else, my team, that's worked on that, and Norfolk Southern, we're in a really good place, and we're very hopeful that we continue to see what we think we're going to see, and we deliver this sooner for less money and have a much better result. That's the concept here. So we're excited about the opportunity. Mr. Kaspertz.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. DJ, this is an interesting deal, especially having toured the V-line with you a little over a year ago. A question on the purchase that we'll make for the Manassas line. We will, of course, own that fee simple and be responsible for maintenance. So we've looked at maintenance issues along that line, and there's no traps out there that might catch us as the,
That's correct. We're doing a little more due diligence this summer, but we feel very confident that the maintenance responsibilities and cost for the Manassas line are much more favorable to Virginia than they were on the Virginia line.
so second question is, give me just a rough approximation of the passenger versus freight use of the Manassas line at this point.
I would have to get those numbers, but I imagine that if you include the VRE trains, we have at least twice as many passenger trains as we have freight trains.
So a 1/3, 2/3 ratio.
And they're diverging. They're diverging, meaning the 2/3 is going up and the 1/3 is going down.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I was very conservative in that estimate, sir.
And so as part of our agreement, will we have dispatch responsibility for the Manassas line?
That gets a little bit complicated. We will have the right to take that over eventually. There's one piece of the Manassas line, the Seminary Passage, that is still part of our negotiation. Whether we would purchase that, whether perhaps VRE would purchase that, whether we did a lease to purchase, we are still negotiating that. Once we had control of that parcel, we would then have the opportunity to dispatch. And then we wouldn't dispatch ourselves, but we would have VRE dispatch or Amtrak dispatch. But
And
yes,
so what's the timing on that parcel? Is this sort of a date specific?
No, we're in negotiation right now, Mr. Gasper, so we probably should leave it where it is.
Okay, that's fine. So, but at some point in the not distant future, once this deal is consummated, we'd have dispatch authority if we choose to exercise it.
This deal would not be as attractive if we didn't have that.
Great. I think this is an attractive deal and a really important piece of real estate. And I think it's good work on the part of you and your team. Well done.
Pass that along to Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Pittard, and then I'd be remiss if I didn't call out the Deputy Secretary Sergeant, who's so tired of 4 a.m. emails, I think he doesn't even return my calls anymore. But thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Calls me back. Mr. Lawson.
Just curious, on the Norfolk Southern deal, do they have a buyback or a clawback option on that, or it was mentioned we bought it in fee simple?
So are you talking about the N line or the V line?
Manassas line.
The Manassas. So listen, folks, we're still in negotiations. We have a term sheet. The term sheet does not allow a clawback of that property. But, to keep digging into we're still in process. So I want to give you high level, I want to make sure you're comfortable and understand, but as we get into the detail, we're still working through some of that, so we need to do that in a negotiating way.
Just, there's nothing that we're going to do, though, that will stand in the way of their common carrier requirement. If we own it, they run freight on it, they would pay us an access fee.
The Secretary,
Dr. Smoot.
I want to commend you and DJ and Jennifer and all who have worked on this. The efforts to get passenger rail to New River Valley are now in their 4th administration and their 3rd secretary. And for the first time, this project appears to be, and I realize it's not done till it's done, but appears to be as it was envisioned initially, and that is coming out the main line from Roanoke to Christiansburg, which is a double-track line all the way, unlike the V line, which Scott and I had the opportunity to ride over a year ago or so. But I also think that the acquisition of the Manassas-Alexandria line is really important for the future of the Commonwealth. It's darn near impossible to put together a 25-mile corridor of connected land in an urban area. In fact, those of us who have worked on the Mountain Valley Pipeline found it darn near impossible to do it in a rural area too. And, this has future opportunities. It could be fiber optics. It could be additional trails. But it's in a place where you cannot put together a 25-mile corridor, probably looking into the future. And all of a sudden, the Commonwealth will own one. And I think that's very exciting. So I like the creativity that has surrounded the work on this all along, and look forward to us all getting on the train. Thank you.
Dr. Smoot, sometimes the stars and the moon and the cosmos just align, and I think, while there was a bunch of hard work done by our staffs, we were fortunate to be in the situation, and we're certainly going to capitalize on it. Anyone else? Nice work, sir. Appreciate it very much. It's going to be an exciting one. And, I will say this, and this isn't all done, obviously, and, you got a station authority down there, but the station, so Norfolk Southern's going to build the platform, right? Which is really important for lots of reasons. But the station that's down there at that location, which has not yet been adopted, sir, by your board, but is a historic train station. So instead of throwing something up down next to a mall that's new, we've got an opportunity to be right down where it was, to the 100 trains that were referenced, 100 train trips, with a potential for a historic station to be what the station authority grabs a hold of. And so that would be pretty neat for that part of the country, part of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth at large. So that's on them. That's for them to go do. That's not what we do here. But it's an exciting opportunity. It's just going to be so much better in so many ways, assuming, Mr. Director, that our engineering and our design tells us we can move forward. So exciting times. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item number 9, the FY 2025-2030 6-year improvement program. Ms. Pryor.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Ms. Pryor.
Good afternoon,
Hope you
Mr.
will.
Secretary, members of the board. I will be talking to you today about the final fiscal years 2025 through 2030 6-year improvement program. The final 6-year improvement program, including highways, rail, and public transit, is $25.8 billion. The highway construction program also includes $750 million in debt service, provides funding to more than 4,700 projects. It also includes about $3.2 billion in funding provided by others. I'll go over some highlights to the final program, as Ms. Farmer explained.
Can I back you up for a second?
Yes, sir.
So if you do the math, about 15 or 16% of the money comes from others, right? And what that means is that it doesn't work the same way necessarily through the formula. And so when we're talking about the maintenance side of this, remember, we keep kicking more into a side of the formula that doesn't spit any maintenance out of it. And so as that number continues, or if it even grows, it's going to make the problem we're talking about worse and worse and worse. All right, continue. Thank you.
As Ms. Farmer explained earlier in her presentation on the 6-year financial plan, the final 6-year improvement program is based on the assumed economic outlook from the Department of Transportation, as well as a transfer of the Commonwealth Transportation Fund to support TPOF. Also, there were additional funds provided to the VDOT maintenance program, as we discussed earlier, for paving. The revenue sharing program returns to $100 million annually following some flexibility provided during the COVID period. There's also a carve-out, if you will, of $25 million a year from the High Priority Projects program for the Innovation and Technology Transportation Fund, a similar allocation of $25 million from the Construction District Grant Program, of $25 million for unpaved roads. In addition, since the draft program, we had 9 public hearings around the state. We've added the final list of transportation alternatives projects that you all approved last month. In addition, there were a number of changes to the I-81 program that have been talked about a little bit earlier when Ms. Farmer was here. There was a $42 million earmark directed to the I-81 program. There was also $70 million provided in the general fund. And then there was a $10 million increase in other funds for the I-81 program from interest earnings on the program, as well as the towing recovery revenue. All of that funding was programmed to existing projects that are underway in the I-81 program right now. And what that did was free up some other money in later years of the 6-year program that allowed us to take advantage of the flexibility language provided in the budget to bring in the 2 remaining candidate projects. And we have funded them for PE and right-of-way so that work can begin on procurement so that we can begin design services. And the 2 additional projects are shown here on the slide. The northbound and southbound mile marker 313 to 317 in Winchester, and the mile marker 116 to 128 additional lane in Christiansburg. These next 2 slides just show the 26 earmark projects. These were also presented to you in April when I shared with you the draft program, but these have been added to the 6-year program now. This slide just shows some high-level changes to our core programs. Most programs had no change. The 5 formula programs show a slight reduction, as Ms. Farmer mentioned. Most of the core federal programs remain the same, however. And the green numbers, again, indicate where there's a change from the draft. And so in conclusion, I'll be presenting to you at the action meeting a resolution for adoption of the FY 2025 to 2030 6-year improvement program. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Stant?
You happen to know, what, did you notice that Freemason Street Bridge in Norfolk? I'm not even familiar with.
How about the earmark?
Slide before that one.
Yep, the earmark on page 5.
At the Brambleton Avenue Bridge?
We'll find out. I don't know where that is either.
It's related to a project that's already in the program, and as soon as I'm done, I can look it up for you and give you that information.
Because there is no bridge.
There's no bridge on Freemason Street. Yeah, unless we're building one across to the pier from the boat club.
Go to PETA? From PETA to the boat club.
Maybe it's going to the Noah property, yeah, okay. We'll find out. Anyone else? Thank you very much, appreciate it. She's still here.
Sure.
Item number 10, state of good repair policy. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. As Ms. Maxwell mentioned during her review of the General Assembly, there was a piece of legislation introduced this past session related to state of good repair, which will necessitate a change to the prioritization process adopted by the board. So I'm going to step through what the program is and what the changes are. I will be joined by our state structure and bridge engineer, Greg Henyon, to talk about, where'd he go? To talk about the details of the technical details of the change. As a reminder, the existing State of Good Repair program was established in the code to repair deficient state and locally owned bridges and pavements. The legislation, or the code at the time, defined state of good repair purposes as improvement of deficient pavement conditions and improvement of structurally deficient, now called poor, bridges. We no longer use the term structurally deficient, following the Federal Highway Administration's lead. Specific eligible uses of the funding include reconstruction and replacement of poor bridges and reconstruction and replacement of pavement on the interstate and primary systems, including municipality-maintained primary extensions. That's where a primary route extends into a municipality. That's a primary extension. The code requires an equitable and needs-based distribution of the funding, with no district receiving more than 17.5% or less than 5.5% of the total funding available in any year. The code also specifies certain extraordinary conditions under which the board may authorize a waiver of that cap or allocation of funds for paving on the secondary system prior to the needs-based distribution. It requires a priority ranking system that takes several things into consideration, including the number, condition, and cost of poor bridges, as well as mileage, condition, and cost to replace deteriorated pavements. Funds are allocated to 4 categories within each district: VDOT bridges, locality bridges, VDOT pavements, and locality pavements. The last time the board adopted or approved the SGR process was in February of 2021. Over the years since the program was established, it's been extremely successful in decreasing the number and percentage of poor bridges, of VDOT and locality-owned bridges. The 2019 Maintenance and Operations Comprehensive Review found that if Virginia changed its bridge management model from the current worst-first approach to a preservation-focused approach, the Commonwealth could expect to maintain its bridge inventory at an acceptable level of service for the next 50 years with the existing level of funding. And recently, in 2021, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission's report included a recommendation that the State of Good Repair statute be amended to allow the use of SGR funding for bridges that are on the cusp of becoming poor. House Bill 1254, introduced in the past session, was approved. It essentially expands the pool of bridges eligible for SGR funding to include cusp bridges. It expanded the types of work to improve bridges eligible for SGR funds, and it applies to new project allocations made after June 1st, 2025. So in the next program update, we'll be implementing the change. So as a result of that, revisions to the board's prioritization process are needed to incorporate these changes. And I'm going to step aside and let Greg talk to you about general condition ratings.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'll begin by doing a quick walkthrough of our general condition rating and the terminology we use. We do have some overlapping and some now outdated terminology, so there's at times a bit confusion on the terms. So our general condition ratings range from 9 being the best all the way down to 1 being the worst, basically a closed bridge. And the descriptors on those through NBIS, the National Bridge Inventory System, are prescribed, and that is our second column on the board. Each number has a discrete rating. Once you look into FHWA guidance and their terminology, they simplify things, and they basically categorize bridges in either a good, fair, or poor condition, and that's generally speaking the terms that we're talking about today. We do have 2 alternative terms that I just want to point out. One is the term cusp, which you just heard Kim mention. A cusp bridge is a general condition rating 5 bridge. It is specifically that, and it is a bridge that is deteriorating and on the cusp of turning into a poor structure.
Mr. Henyon?
Yes.
And can I help you with the next one?
Absolutely.
The next one are 2 words that we're never going to use again. So I'm not even going to tell you what they say. And they've fallen out of favor, and it's been changed to the national level for exactly the reason I think that when I first was on the board, I was shocked when I saw that we had structurally deficient bridges, because as a non-engineer and a non-CTB and a non-FHWA person, structurally deficient meant something to me that it didn't mean to them. So those words are going away. We're not using them anymore. The NBIS rating system is, as you see, we probably won't use that very much. We'll probably use FHWA in most of our discussions, and it's good, fair, and poor, but that's how it stacks up, given what it was before. I just needed to make my commercial, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So the chart on the left basically is a rehash and a simplification of what I just walked you through, and really what we're showing here is the benefits of attacking repairs and the beginnings of deterioration up in that fair and that cusp part of the curve, as opposed to waiting for it to fall into a poor. And one of the primary things we're trying to accomplish here is to attack this earlier whenever possible and do so and stretch out those funds as much as we can.
I like the analogy that I've used where the roof in your rec room is leaking, right? And you can either, when you first see it, you can deal with it, or you can let it leak and you can watch the ceiling fall in. And then you watch the water on the floor, and then it's going to damage the floor. And then we'll get to it, after the holes in the roof and the ceiling's been destroyed, and now we got a bad floor, and now we're going to fix it. And that's sort of what we were doing before. And now we're going to fix it when it starts. Not exactly when it starts, but when it gets bad enough that before it gets to the floor, we're going to fix it. And it's going to save us a lot of money over time. Mr. Henyon.
Yes, sir. So just a quick walkthrough of what these changes mean for our program. First off, the list of bridges eligible, the body of bridges eligible under this program is increasing by tenfold. So up to this point in time, we've been generally considering roughly 300 bridges for SGR funding, and this will allow us to potentially consider 3,000 bridges. That doesn't mean we can do 3,000 bridges, but it does give us a tremendous amount of additional flexibility as to what we can do and consider with the program. And really importantly, this aligns the SGR program with, as Kim mentioned, our preservation-focused management approach for our structures. Eligible improvement types, this will allow the eligible improvement types to be broadened. So instead of talking about replacements or superstructure replacements, we can do additional treatments to make sure that both poor and cusped bridges are addressed. And these include things such as deck overlays, bridge painting, some beam end reconstruction, steel beam end reconstruction, joint reconstructions, major scour improvements. And these can, generally speaking, be implemented for a fraction of the cost, roughly 20% of the cost, and in some cases can extend life upwards to 30 to 40 years. And I do have a couple of slides to show you some of this work, just to get an idea of what I'm talking about. One of our best bangs for the buck is the elimination of leaking deck joints. The deck joints, when they leak, is the primary entry point for chlorides in water, which greatly accelerates the corrosion of our bridge elements on the deck and underneath it. So hitting these with this type of work can potentially add 35 to 50 years on the life of the structure. Another example, so this is steel beam repairs. This is typically underneath a leaking joint, but getting in and getting those steel repaired, getting the rust completely removed, and getting good corrosion protection on that is a fraction of the cost compared to coming in and replacing steel members. Another great example is painting, the painting of the steel itself. Steel structures, we can get 15 to 20 years additional life just by removing rust and updating coatings. And then finally, with culverts, using flow liners is another great example of the type of work we can do to greatly extend the life of the culvert without replacing it at, once again, a fraction of the cost. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Kim.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any questions before Mr. Henyon? All right, thank you.
This chart shows the current distribution percentages for the State of Good Repair program. There was no change in the legislation to the min or the max or the requirement for the needs-based distribution. So once we add the new cusp structures into the needs-based distribution, there are some changes to the percentages of, to the distribution percentages. Very minor changes in most districts, but I did just want to make you all aware of that. And again, this will be implemented this time next year when we update the 6-year program. On to paving. The current prioritization process for SGR local paving includes a cap per locality of $1.5 million. So because of that, available funding to allocate could exceed the amount possible to allocate with the cap implemented. So we are recommending a revision in the updated prioritization process to allow an increase in the cap per locality if the amount of funding distributed to that district for local paving in a given fiscal year exceeds the amount possible to allocate.
Does everybody understand? So the money that's going to paving, if you add all the localities up and multiply by 1.5, sometimes we send the district more than that. And they can't spend it because we have a policy that caps them. So the point is, if they're getting more through the formula to the district, how do you let them use the money that we're sending to them? Go ahead.
This slide just shows a little example of that. We have an issue in the Hampton Roads district. We've had this issue for a few years, where the district gets about $21 million a year for SGR local paving, and there are 11 eligible localities. So in a given year, while they're distributed $21 million, it's only possible to allocate $16.5 million, leaving about $4.5 million unavailable. So we are actively working with localities in the Hampton Roads district to identify additional primary extension projects up to a cap of $2 million per locality. These projects would be considered as an amendment in the July meeting should you approve the SGR policy changes, which incorporate some flexibility, allowing the board to change that cap. So we've written, is there a question?
Ms. Owens.
I just have a quick question. So what happened to that $4.5 million that they couldn't spend?
It remains on a
Balance
balance
entry.
entry, and it is accrued.
In
Yeah.
their district?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It just sits there and can't be spent.
Okay.
And of course, when you apply a $1.5 million to every locality, like every locality is the same, right? You got the biggest one and you have the smallest one, and they're both 1.5. Go ahead.
Okay, so in summary, you should have gotten a markup of the SGR policy in your packet. So to just call out the changes for you, we are conforming the SGR prioritization process to the revised code language we just went over, expanding the eligibility of bridges and the treatment types. We're also requiring prioritization of all poor bridges as well as the cusp bridges recommended by the state structure and bridge engineer. Recall that we're going from 300 bridges eligible for the program to 3,000. The policy also is going to be separated from the board resolution, which has the adoption of the policy, similar to how we're developing other policy documents now. It also eliminates some outdated background language in the last approved SGR process from February of 2021. In terms of SGR local paving, we've included language permitting an increase in the maximum allowable allocation per locality in the event the amount of funding distributed to that district in a fiscal year exceeds the possible allocation based on the number of eligible localities. The draft revised policy doesn't include any other changes that aren't already included in board policy or federal or state code or existing funding program requirements. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm happy to, in July, the board will be presented with a request to formally approve the updated policy and then update the SGR prioritization process. And then we will also be bringing a list of SGR local paving projects in the Hampton Roads District to amend to the program. And we will implement the revised bridge process in next year's 6-year program update. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you. Well done. Appreciate it. Our next item on the agenda is item number 11. Ms. Margie Ray will talk about some safety performance and safety measure targets.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Secretary,
Hope
members
you're
of the
well.
board.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. So this is our annual update to safety presentation that I've been giving for a while, dealing with the federal safety targets. So just give you all a little background and a refresher on where we've been with some of our safety targets and some of the requirements that we have, and then provide to you all our proposed targets for the 2025 year. So Code of Virginia says that you all are to establish the targets for the surface transportation system. Federal law does have 5 measures that we have to work with. 3 of those are ones that we share with DMV. the Highway Safety Office at DMV. They are set annually each year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because some things have changed a bit, and just giving you all more context. Our timing is always a little important because DMV has some reporting requirements, as does VDOT, so we will be trying to drive everything toward meeting those schedules. So these are the 5 measures that we have to set targets for annually. Our number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities, number of serious injuries, rate of serious injuries, and then a combined measure that are our non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And this is for all public roads in Virginia. And again, it's the first 3 that are the measures that require coordination with DMV, their Highway Safety Office. But we got some new federal requirements. So the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021 made some modifications saying that our safety targets have to demonstrate level or improved performance for those 3 common measures. And they've, the other part that we haven't really communicated with you is that we also look at things over a 5-year average. While the board has been adopting an annual target, VDOT and DMV do report something that includes that annual target and a 5-year target. So the new rule says that we have to have a baseline 5-year period, which is that 2019 to 2023 period, and that our 5-year target for the averages from the 2025 period now has to show that it's level or declining or improved. Again, that annual report that the DMV and VDOT are required to submit have to include both of those. So we're going to be asking you all to adopt an annual target that allows us to achieve that 2025 average, 5-year average target, and meet that federal requirement. Just to give you some more context, though, on where we are with our performance, you can see we've gone back quite a ways here in time because we do have these 5-year averages that affect us. The box on the right shows you that performance period that are used in calculating the 5-year average for the baseline period, 2019 to 23. So what we're saying there is for fatalities, where it says an average of 913.8, our next 5-year average compared to that has to be the level or improving from that point. So that's driving some of how we're dealing with some of the information. In the bottom right-hand corner, we wanted to share some information for where are we year to date. Because, we see some really good news there with our fatalities. We've had a significant drop of about 10% this last year. What we can see is that for year-to-date through May 31st, we are about 8.3% declining in fatalities. So that's very good. And our serious injuries are also declining. Now, that only takes us through April of 8.6%.
Yes, Bruce.
So have we attempted to attribute those declines to any specific programs or efforts that we've made?
That's something that's underway right now, too, because that's certainly a very important question. And this summer, I think we have enough information for some of our projects that are completed now to start looking at that to see if we can attribute it to that. We tend to like at least 3 years of post-construction data to be able to smooth things out and understand what's happening with our performance.
So if we can attribute it, then we can duplicate it and spend more on that, of course.
Absolutely.
Great. And is that something you'll report on before end of year, Margie? I heard a maybe. Thank you.
It's,
I think we got to get through the analysis first.
When you're trying to tie an effort or numbers of efforts, it's
I heard a maybe.
working on it.
One thing just to note is that we've tended to see through a number of years now that first kind of period in each year, that the year tends to track to that. So that says that maybe we still have a good news story and that right now fatalities and serious injuries are down. And if we hold true to history, that hopefully for the year 2024 will also be down.
So Margie, this total numbers, do you have a VMT slide as well?
Rates?
There we go. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the rate's dropping significantly as well.
Right, and we had a little bit of that bump during COVID when VMT was down, and so that obviously affected the trend lines. But now that VMT is pretty close to where we were pre-COVID, we can see that the numbers have come down. So serious injuries are somewhat level, not completely declining, but definitely see that impact with increasing in VMT.
Margie?
Secretary. Margie, just a general question. How does that rate in particular compare with states that surround us? Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia.
I'm going to turn to
West
Stephen
Virginia.
Reed, who's here with me from Traffic Operations Division, and it's his team that does all of this analysis and works with the data. I don't know if you've looked at nearby states. I think it tracks with national trends.
Yeah, I think we're tracking with the national trends. I've just checked North Carolina recently, and we're a little bit better than them. But we need to go back to 2023, where we have national data, or 2022, beg your pardon, to look at that, and we were better than Kentucky, North Carolina, and some of the others as well. But as you go north into the more urbanized states, to the northeast, you tend to have lower fatality rates.
Thank you.
So as we look to set targets for calendar year 2025, we explored a couple of approaches given the new federal requirement of having the level or declining targets. So we looked at analytical model that I'll talk a little bit more about. You guys have seen some of the results of that. We did a high and low range prediction from that analytical model and looked at those results. And then we also just did a kind of a back-end calculation that is, what is the required annual number to get us to a 5-year average that is level and meets the federal requirement. Model, this is, again, something you all have seen. It's a statistical model that looks at, predicts a future year of performance using external influencing factors, and they are adjusted annually. And so again, we did a high and a low projection. You're looking at some different trend factors, BMT being a key one. But some of those external factors that are built into the analytical model are the BMT, demographics, employment, weather, liquor sales, VDOT construction, and spending. So our maintenance and operations spending, as well as the spending that DMV does on their behavioral programs. And all of this is down at the district level that we're able to really look at and drill down into. After we project our baseline performance for year 2025, we subtract from that the expected benefits of smart scale and highway safety improvement projects that have been programmed that will be completed during that performance period. And then we subtract them from that model prediction. So that's the line down second from the bottom there. And then it's just math where we calculate the rate measures from those count performance measures using our projected VMT growth.
Casper, it's to your earlier point. We're taking the model that predicts sort of steady state. Then we carefully try to inculcate and incorporate the safety benefits that will come out of these projects. But, and then we get a new number, right? And that's the expected performance. So what you're really getting at is the impact of the project safety benefits. So that's what we're trying to get to. And it's not all science.
I understand, but each year we have more data.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, another question.
Yes, sir.
Margie, do we have a bike ped chart that replicates what we saw on the total fatalities?
Not within this presentation, but certainly we can provide that.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, can you give us just the raw numbers on that? I know that pedestrian fatalities were down significantly, but bike were up significantly.
We'll get those and give them to you.
But we do have that.
And listen, folks, the model, the steady state isn't steady, right? We're doing all sorts of things as a society to incent people and to get them to use a bike or to walk. So we're spending a lot of money on safety improvements and bike lanes and all sorts of things to get more people into that sort of modality. And you would expect when you do that, the more people you have there that are vulnerable, the more situations you're going to see. So we're pushing demand, and then we're trying to hold down the impact by doing these projects, by doing education, by doing all sorts of things, right? but you're likely to see, particularly initially, some increase because you're pushing demand, right? If none of those bike lanes were created and none of those things were, we weren't pushing people to do those things, there'd be less of them doing it, and there'd be less impact. So we're sort of chasing our tail a little bit in that regard and trying to catch up to it. But I mean, it's where we are, right? And it's what we're going to continue to do.
Mr. Secretary, in that regard, ultimately, we would need an equivalent VMT for bicycle traffic in particular, maybe a BMT. And I've heard reference to this potentially being a new statistic that we can achieve, to your point, to give us a reference point on the rate rather than just the total
You certainly want to know how
number.
many people are there are vulnerable users, right? If you're having more vulnerable users, but the rate's way down, then that's one thing. If you got more vulnerable users being impacted and the rate's way up, that's a whole different thing, to your point.
Will there be an equivalent factor for bike transit at some point in the future to VMT?
I would suggest it's in the future. I think we've talked about it a lot internally. There's just, there's limited data for our bike and pedestrian utilization, and so it's a difficult thing. I mean, it's a hard nut to crack, but I think there's a lot of work going on in that area nationally, and Virginia's certainly very interested in it as well.
Good, I'll stand by, thank you.
Okay, and I think one thing to highlight here, because we've had this model that we've been using for quite a while, and it really is a very data-driven approach to looking at information. FHWA doesn't prescribe to us how we can how we have to set our targets. So I think Virginia has been looked at very favorably in using this model. A lot of other states have looked at this. So I think that there's just been such great work that has really opened our eyes to some of the things that we might be able to do to help solve some of the problems or improve our outcomes anyway. And hopefully we'll be able to have the data that demonstrates that. But then the second approach, again, just to be able to meet the federal requirement, is what is the calculated annual value for 2024 and 2025, the first 3 years of actual data that we have, and that gives us that 2025 five-year average that's equal to the baseline from the 2023 five-year period. And then the two rate measures just calculated from that value. So I've got some charts here. Oops, sorry. Let me get to our logic that we used in trying to recommend targets to you all. So in order to meet the target, we wanted to first look at the model output, and does that meet the requirement of being level or declining? And also looking at reasonableness. Is it something that seems to be very aggressive for us to achieve in an annual one-year period to be able to achieve a five-year average? And if not, then you would use the calculated five-year average. So when we look at this, so these charts, on the left-hand side is just the annual values, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. And then the right-hand side are the five-year average that are calculated. The blue numbers, so like the 913.8 in the right-hand side, that's the five-year baseline number that we need to be level or declining from. And then the left-hand side, starting with the top row, is our model predictions. So the red line is that high range, and we can see that we end up on an annual basis at 1,035 fatalities. That's a 14% increase from the 907. But that also results in 986.2 with a target that is not level or declining. So that's not something that would work for us. On the low end, in the purple, we have an annual value for 2025 that is 794. That results in a 12% reduction from the 907. And that gives us a value that is slightly declining from the 913.8. One thing that I mentioned, reasonableness, 12% reduction, we feel like could be pretty aggressive. So it's not necessarily optimistic, I guess would be a better way as well of achieving that. So then just looking at the lower row there of the level five-year approach, we have on the right-hand side to stay level, 913.8. What are the calculated values for 2024 and 2025 in green that give us the 913.8? And we can see that results in a value of 819 for 2025, and that's a 10% reduction. And so our staff recommendation on this one is that we would still stay with the five-year level average, even though the low prediction does get us there. We just felt like the annual value was very optimistic. Any questions on how the charts read and the information provided?
Do the questions.
Okay. So fatality rate, this is just math. This is just calculated from the count values on the previous slide. And in both cases, you would end up with a level or declining value. For the serious injuries, same thing in that we've calculated using the model, the numbers that, the annual values for the red and the purple. Both of those result in a 5-year average that is increasing, so it doesn't meet the federal requirement. When we do the level targets, again, back-ending into a 24 and 25 value, that is what gives us a level performance of 7,200.4. So our recommendation here is that we would use the level approach as well. And that's a 9% reduction. Serious injury rates. Same thing, just math, calculates the rate value based off of our VMT projections and the counts. And then the last chart here is our non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Same approach using our model values, which both show, both our high and low ranges show increasing 5-year averages. The level 5-year approach does provide us mathematically, obviously, the level or decline, well, level in this case, 704.2 with an annual value of 619. That's a 19% decrease. That is very optimistic, but of the two approaches that we've looked at, this is the one that helps us meet the federal requirement. So we're proposing, off of the charts that you just saw, of using the 5-year level average for all of those. And you can see the values comparing the 2023 actual performance to our proposed 2025 target, and just providing to you all the percent change between those.
So let me say a couple things. I hate the word targets when I'm talking about this. I say that every time, but I still hate it. Projection, I guess, works for me better. You know, the federal government and some others have adopted the number of 0 as their target. And I just don't live in a world where I have a goal that I think is wholesale unattainable. I like goals that I think we can get to if we try really hard and the stars align and we do our best work, that they're achievable, right? So I've never been one that subscribes to something I don't think is in any way achievable. And I don't think 0 is achievable. I don't think it's even close, federally, nationally. And so while obviously we want it to be 0, we're never going to get to 0 if we operate in the environment which we operate today. So how do we make it better? And how do we get aggressive? And I will tell you that the administration, the governor's office, and all of us want to continue to push on this, and you've heard me talk about it before. We've got a lot of people we're pushing demand, as I've told you. COVID resulted in people doing things that were weird and different on the roads, meaning, you know, the amount of speeders and sort of aggressive driving changed, and patterns changed, all sorts of things changed. But at the end of the day, we're really focused on trying to make sure drivers are educated, that we have good enforcement, that we have good highway safety, engineering and design and all that sort of things. And how do we keep pushing those numbers down? So we could have gone to the 0 number, or we could have gone to a really aggressive number that we didn't think was attainable. But we want to see something that's attainable. And I know the governor's going to be pushing on this and talking about it. I continue to say it. The General Assembly, for good reason, tries to make changes to legislation as it relates to a lot of these practices, you know, with bicycles and peds and all sorts of rolling stops, Colorado stops, and this and that. And at the end of the day, there's too many one-off things. We need to figure out what the best way is to do this and to do it. That's what we need to do. But the rules and the laws are not clear. People don't understand them. The bicyclists don't understand them. I was in Scandinavia, and I'm going to be quiet in a minute, but I thought everybody, you know, from my time in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, I thought bicycles always had the right of way everywhere, but not in Scandinavia. It depends on where you are. Sometimes it's the pedestrians, sometimes it's the bicycles, sometimes you got to sort of know the rules of where you're going, right? In any case, we need to do better. We're really focused on doing better. And we're setting goals that we think are going to be hard, but that are attainable. And we're going to work really hard to get there. And that's what we're trying to present to you today. Mr. Kaspertz.
Appreciate your comments, Mr. Secretary, but I guess first a question. In the past where we've had this conversation, you've provided breakouts of the categories of fatalities and serious injuries. And what that shows us, I don't see them included in today's presentation, but what that shows us is that we have a very narrow focus or range of options within our purview as a transportation board and actually changing these numbers. The Secretary very appropriately mentioned things like the speed enforcement and things of that nature. I think we as a board have to realize that in that number of 907, there's a very small percentage that relates to things that we do or have authority or control over. And I guess the challenge I have every year with this is we're being asked to make a projection on the whole of that. I would tell you right now, if we could implement speed cameras in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if we would increase our enforcement on the part of troopers and local police forces, if we were to do any number of things outside of our purview and control, we'd probably have a dramatic effect on that. Our piece is very small, and I think it's important that we understand that as a board. We're making infrastructure changes. We're improving road surfaces. We're improving markings, in some cases signals and pedestrian warning devices. But that's a very small piece of that 907 and 7,488. I just think it's important that just from a percentage perspective that in the next discussion of this that we all understand how big our piece is, and then the significance of us being asked to make an overall recommendation on what our fatality and serious injury rates should be in the next year. I think, and I'll close by saying, I think we're ill-equipped to do it. We've had this conversation before, but I just think because we have so many new board members to understand the significance of infrastructure in the context of those numbers is really important.
Mr. Secretary? I agree with Mr. Kaspertz. They talk about education, engineering, and enforcement as the 3 E's in safety, and we have one piece of that, which is the engineering piece of it is ours, right? For the most part, it's in how VDOT builds things. Enforcement is the state police, and so another piece of the puzzle, I think, for us just to understand is sort of what the situation is with the state police. But I'm also remembering, I think last year's conversation on this, maybe it was 2 years ago, when we talked about how much money was going to go to DMV for education. And I think that what we asked you to do is come back and tell us what happened with that money. You know, we asked I forget who was here from DMV, but we said to them, you know, how will you know if this is successful? And the answer we got was clicks on the website, but maybe there's more to know. And it was not an insignificant amount of money, as I recall. So I think it would be really helpful to this board to sort of get an update on where we are with enforcement and what's going on with the money at DMV and how effective do we think that is. Because it's great that we're going to be able to measure the stuff we've been able to do with engineering, because that is the part we can control. But to know more about those others would also be pretty good.
We don't control them.
Well, you do.
We here.
You do. DMV is under you.
That's correct. All right, thank you. Listen, we're not going to control the enforcement. We know we're underfunded. We know we're understaffed. We do know that. We've had some wholesale work going on at DMV to ensure that DMV and VDOT are aligned in the expenditures of the funds that they have together. What I talked about was the governor and the administration are particularly interested in this area to make sure that all 3 of us are aligned. While that's not the role of the CTB, obviously it's something we should be concerned about, and I have the DMV as well, so that's part of my responsibility. So the commissioner and the commissioner of the DMV and the head of enforcement are all engaged going forward in how do we make this place more safe. And a lot of it's going to be, you know, some of it's rule changes and legislation changes. But what happens is legislators with good intentions go and try to do this or do that. And doing this or doing that isn't fulsome or has an unintended consequence. And so we're trying to be more holistic. We do at VDOT also have opportunity to communicate, and you've seen a lot of that on your interstates. You've seen signs with messages. You've seen service safety trucks now with safety messages on that were sponsored by a third party where they pay us to put the messages that we want that are about safety on those trucks. And so we're trying to push more and more and more messaging out, not just the infrastructure piece from VDOT, but really the messaging. And you've heard me talk about trying to do more with driver education. I mean, it is, you know, listen, I'm not going to be a secretary that's going to recommend we have a driver's test that everybody needs to take every 4 years or something. I'm not doing that. But the thought that you take a driver's test when you're 15 and 8 months, and I'm 50 years later, and nobody's taught me anything that's changed. Nobody's given me a handbook. Nobody told me anything. Nothing's changed. You hope you don't go to a doctor that does that, right? Their knowledge is 50 years old, and that's what you're getting. Well, that's what we do. I laugh at it too, but that's what we do. You know, when was the last time somebody sat you down and explained the laws and the rules that have changed on the roads? You know, I love drawing my map where I've got the two one-way streets, you know, and you got a left turn onto a left turn. You can do that, or left turn from a one-way onto another one-way, right? Well, what if there's a bike lane next to you? Can you still make the left turn? What if the bike lane is both ways? Can you still make the left turn? What's the rule? What's the law say? And most people don't know the answer, right? So we put these things in there, but we tell nobody what the rules are, right? And so that's a problem. We need to do better. So it's really to your point, it's really much more holistic than just VDOT. It's the education piece, it's the enforcement piece, and I'm telling you, we're going to work hard on it, and as long as we're here, and I hope this board will continue to do that going forward from their piece. But as I said, we can be knowledgeable, but public safety will do what public safety and the governor want to do, and DMV is much more aligned. I shouldn't say it like that. I have authority over DMV. I don't over public safety is what I'm trying to say. But they've been great partners, and they want to do it too.
Right, and I would just point out, Mr. Secretary, that you have people sitting around this table who live in every part of the Commonwealth and talk to different legislators all the time because we are the people that we are. And the more we understand how the pieces fit together, the more we can help advocate for those holistic solutions. Because I agree with you, the one-off, let me fix this thing that somebody came and complained to me about, it's a bad idea. I mean, in Arlington, where I live right now, most of the right turn on reds are gone because they're just too dangerous for all kinds of people. So you know, we're learning, we're backing away, but I just really.
And we also, Ms. Hines, we have to accept the fact that certainly in the short term, we cannot engineer our way out of bad behavior. Right? You see these terrible incidents happen where somebody does something really dumb and something really bad happens. And the first reaction is, can we fix that place?
Right.
Without regard to somebody made a really bad decision. It did something really dumb that wasn't going to work in that place, but they did it anyway. And now we want to fix the place, and what we really need to do is get a hold of the behavior. So it's tough. And when you're talking about serious injuries and death, it's really tough. You know, because these are incredibly consequential situations. And so, you know, I can go on and on. It just blows me away how many we have in work zones. And, you know, y'all don't see as much as I see, because I see pretty much most of them. And we had one the other day. You know, a guy ran, a state trooper pulled somebody or went to somebody who was half on the road, half off the road. They go to investigate and deal with them. It was a drug-induced problem. And then somebody runs into the truck that stopped behind it and hits the car and flips it around, and it's a drunk driver. I'm like, for goodness sakes. You know, like, think about a law enforcement personnel out on a highway where you're stopping to deal with somebody that has a drug problem, and then a drunk driver runs into you. For goodness sakes. You know, that's not an engineering problem. That's a behavioral problem, right? And you know, I could go on, but that you know, we got to get, people have got to address the behavioral piece of this, because most of it, when you see no seatbelt, you see speeding, you see distracted driving, right? You have drunk driving, you have drug driving. What do any of those things have to do with engineering? Nothing. They're people just exhibiting bad behavior. They're drinking and driving, they're drugging and driving, they're looking at their phone, they're not putting on their seatbelt, and they're speeding. If you have a 35-mile-an-hour road and somebody drives 70 on it and kills themselves, it's not the road. It's the person and their behavior. So we've got to get to some of that. You know, at the same time, we got to be really diligent about how we plan and how we execute safety on our highways and on our roadways and in our other modes of transportation. We need to be very thoughtful about that, and we need to have enforcement. But at the end of the day, a lot of this is people deciding to do stuff that they shouldn't do, and it causes a big problem. And you know, that's my view of what most of it exists. You know, you very rarely see people that are following the speed, that aren't drunk, that are in their lane, that that's not where the accidents are happening, right? Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's more of a comment, but is there any, we talk about bikes and automobiles. There's a hybrid where I live, and that's motorized bikes and people.
E-bikes and
Yeah,
low-speed
exactly.
vehicles.
And they travel 35 miles an hour and run through stop signs and all that. So, you know,
The 35's okay, Mr. Coleman. It's the running through the stop sign that's not okay.
yeah. Well, I'm just saying that they're out operating like it's a bicycle, but it's a semi-motorcycle. So I don't know. I know this is part of out of our hands, but is there any statistic are we following for that?
Well, here's what we're doing.
E-bikes?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at all this, but you also need to understand something. The numbers are still very small compared to how many people are out there, how many miles, and how many intersections, and how many all that is, right? And so it's hard to go fix it where it's at, you know, it's not so simple, right? It's a lot of one-offs. They're just one-offs, right? They're just things that happen. And so it's really hard on a holistic way to sort of get to the root and get rid of all of it. But I think a comprehensive approach like we're trying to take, where we look at our laws and our regulations, where we look at our education and we look at our enforcement, and we look at our infrastructure and how we design things, if we truly work hard on all four of those, all three or four of those, I think we can make a difference, and I think we're starting to. But that's the goal. That would be the goal. Ms. Sellers.
So right now it's showing improvement, it's showing level. What happens if we increase?
Nothing.
Nothing happens?
These projections are merely that. And you can put any number on the paper that conforms with the requirement, and there's no impact if you make or don't make it. Now, I don't really care about that piece of it. I care about making it and driving the number down, but there is no penalty, there is no consequence, if you will. So a lot of people put zero. They take the federal route. Well, nobody's making zero. They're all going to fail, right? But they have a different method, they have a different thought process and a different philosophy, and so be it. Yes, sir. Mr. Davis.
Secretary, do PSAs play any role in being effective as a means of trying to change the behavior?
You know, I think so. We do some PSA work. You know, that's what, in essence, what, you know, that kind of communication is what we're putting on our trucks. It's what we're putting on our signs. It's just, you know, whether it's a public service announcement that the media runs for free or whether we sort of put it out there. Yeah, I think they do. I think there's a lot of opportunity for education to help us. And
In their
communication.
phone while they're driving. So. Something to get their attention, that's all I'm saying. And perhaps.
Something to distract them, right?
From their distraction,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Merrill.
I agree with most of what has been said with regard to the importance of education and enforcement. We're setting a target for a 10% reduction in fatalities, but we basically have no interventions that we are contemplating to achieve that.
That's not true.
Okay.
If you go back to slide 8, there's tons of things we're doing, but they're not all, I think it's slide 8. Where was the one that said modeling, and then, there, that one, go back.
Sorry.
Go.
9.
That's it. Project safety benefits. So I know that doesn't seem so clear, but that's what is attempting to measure what Mr. Kasperitz would like us to try to get to, which is what we're trying to get to. So here's all the things we do in safety. Here's the money we spend. Here's the infrastructure we do. Here's what DMV does. Here's what enforcement. Everything that's going on that we can get our hands on. It says this will impact that. And we run it through the model, and it changes the model prediction to the expected performance. And so all those things you're talking about, yeah, there's not a list there, to your point. But no, those are the interjections.
Mr. Secretary, if I may add.
Just a couple, if I may also, then, the second item, it looks like from your slide 12 that you basically said in order to stay flat, that's what the number is going to be, the 913. So you backed into that number based upon keeping us flat, correct?
Yeah, what we said is sometimes we're going to see some increases in our modeling, and we're not, and we're not accepting those at the high end, right? We're not going to accept something that's higher, so we're accepting something that's level because it fits in the range, and we think it's attainable.
That's my point. And the third item is everyone's required to have their vehicle inspected on an annual basis. And I made this suggestion 2 years ago, I believe, is that is an opportunity to inform drivers about some of the changes that are going on in the state, whether it be buckle your seatbelt, enforcement of drunk driving, the pullover when you see a stranded vehicle on the side of the road. And that would get into the area of education, about educating drivers about the things that they need to be aware of when they get the car inspected. I agree with you, getting your driver's license until you turn 70, you don't have to take a test. I just went through one.
Is it 70? Is it coming?
70.
All right, it's coming.
Yeah, and I passed, by the way.
Good man. Good man.
But on an annual basis, every vehicle must be inspected. And that, to me, is a great opportunity to remind people of both the consequences as well as the information. You know, we spend a lot of money as a Commonwealth on those education boards across highways and interstates. In my area, they are not on 75% of the time. Even if there's constant reminders of, you move over for.
Commissioner loves hearing that.
Well, I've said it before, but, you know, it's true. If you drive 81 and 66, you don't see a whole lot of messages other than the holidays, you know. So, to me, there could be a more aggressive.
There are missed opportunities, Mr. Merrill. I hear you 100%. Yeah, it's interesting. We've had the debate before, and I've seen various statistics, but there's some that would like to get rid of the annual inspections, right? That's been in and out of legislation a few times, so we'll see where that ends up. You know, as a guy who was like most young people trying to put money together to have a vehicle, I didn't have any real money to, you know, and if the brakes went out and they were $300, what am I gonna do, right? So you might drive on those brakes a little longer if you didn't have to have it inspected and the man didn't say, hey, you gotta change the brakes now. You might go a little 10% or something, and, you know, that's not safe, right? It's not a good thing. So we'll see how all that ends up. But, yeah, I think, sir, there are a lot of opportunities, to your point, and that's what we're trying to make sure we take advantage of. So that's a good one at the inspection place. All right?
All right, just one last slide, which is just that next month we'll be bringing to you the resolution asking for your adoption of those federal targets. Thank you.
Mr. Stant.
I think I know the answer, but these are federal targets that we agreed to. and
Their
we set.
targets were reporting to the federal government,
So
yes, sir.
what happens if we don't meet them?
Nothing.
That's what I thought.
All right. Thank you. You know, incredibly important piece. And I'll tell you, as I indicated, that we have a lot of attention on it, and you should be hearing more in the not-too-distant future. All right, with that, we're into director's items. Mr. Trogdon, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Only to say thank you for considering our 6-year improvement program. Very happy about the staff, what they've put together, and so we look forward to, once we get it adopted, if it's the pleasure of the board, and we'll start working with our partners to get contracts out and get moving for next fiscal year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, I have one item for you, for your information this afternoon. It has to do with the Route 58 corridor. We do have a project that is continuing to progress. As you recall, maybe a couple of years ago, I brought forward the Lover's Leap project that's under construction right now, and it has another 3 years to go before that's completed. But we're progressing the next phase of the 58 corridor, which is Vesta. It's valued at about $235 million. This is one of the reasons why I'm bringing it to you, because we're going to put out the request for qualifications here this month. And due to the size of it, it does have some inherent risks to it. For those that don't know the 58 corridor or the project, it is in Patrick County in the Salem district. It's about a 4.5-mile widening from a 2-lane to a 4-lane divided facility. The main purpose is to enhance safety along the corridor. And believe it or not, it is a major thoroughfare from the port of Hampton Roads to Interstate 77 and points westward. So this will open up the corridor, continue to open up the corridor from the port to 77. We do have 4 risks on the project. One is dealing with environmental concerns. Our good friends, the northern long-eared bat, tricolored bat, and some green floater mussels may be on the project site. At least for the bats, it's a time of year restriction that we can certainly mitigate that situation. We'll have to do a biological assessment for the mussels, and that may result also in some time of year restrictions being in the stream. We have a major bridge on the project as well. The Dan River Bridge. Right now, the bridge is in poor condition. So if you took notice to the previous bridge, the state of good repair. No, it's below cusp. It's a poor condition. It is not weight restricted at this point in time, but due to the rural nature of the facility or the 58 corridor, there are limited detour routes that are available. So if the bridge becomes posted, we may have to have some additional maintenance activities performed on the bridge to keep that bridge in service through 2029. The third mitigation or item of risk is stream and wetland mitigation credits. We still are in the process of purchasing stream mitigation credits, but we have purchased all the wetland credits to date. And then finally, believe it or not, we do have a septic field that's on some commercial property that we'll need to avoid. So out of all the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, these are definitely in our wheelhouse, and the 4 risks aren't that big. But we'll be getting the request for qualifications out this month, and we'll see where this goes. Mr. Secretary?
Still haven't seen the Indian burial.
Don't jinx me. Mr. Yates, through our in-depth environmental assessment to
Is
date.
that going to be the last comment of yours at a workshop meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board after 8.5 years? Did you say that?
I think we're good.
Anybody else for Mr. Britch? Ms. Mathis,
Yes,
you have some housekeeping.
yes. After lunch today, I sent everybody a note regarding logistics for this evening. I have listed 4 of you that I've already spoken to as point of contact.
Team leaders. Put that on your resume.
I sent it to both.
Okay, because I don't have.
So, given the fact that this is the last board meeting, workshop meeting of this board for this fiscal year, and we have some members who are leaving the board, we upgraded to the boathouse to celebrate appropriately, because I just couldn't do it again like we did it before. So we're going to go to the boathouse. It's a beautiful spot, and celebrate and enjoy our colleagues appropriately. I don't have any particular comments other than that. So I look forward to seeing everybody at 6 o'clock at the boathouse, where we will assemble, not in meeting, but in social fun. And so I appreciate everybody being here, and this meeting is adjourned.